Chapter 2442. On the grassland in the west of the Sword Heart Realm, the battle was nearing its end. Princess Mingzhu had killed the purple-robed man with a single slash of her sword. A third-order martial king didn't even have the slightest chance of escaping under the woman's sword. In fact, he even lost his own life. Suddenly, the morale of the purple-robed man's subordinates was slackened. If it were not for blind left and blind right, they would have been in a mess. They might have even gone their separate ways. After all, the current situation was very unfavorable for them. As for Bai Jian, he had also slain 6 martial emperors in a row due to his previous outburst. Now he was completely exhausted and fell to the ground. If Princess Mingzhu had not killed the enemy's leader and caused the morale of the army to slacken, even his comrades in the Sword Heart Realm would not have been able to protect him. The warriors of the Grey Wolf clan began to panic. With the appearance of the woman, the situation of the battle had changed greatly, and the scales of victory had tilted to an extremely severe degree. With the fall of their top combat strength, how could they be a match for the woman? Blind left and blind right could not help but mutter in their hearts. They did not expect there to be so many monsters in the Four Realms Alliance. Furthermore, their strength was so powerful that it caused the crowd to feel helpless. Sometimes the truth made people feel helpless. No matter how ambitious you were, you still had to bow your head in the face of reality. Blind Left had already begun to think of countermeasures. He was ready to see if the woman could still attack. Otherwise, it would be difficult for the two of them to take down Li Fengmu. When the woman came again, they would naturally not be able to resist. The two of them looked at each other and understood each other's thoughts. They knew very well how to make a choice in the current situation. Li Fengmu was very excited. Although Princess Mingzhu came alone, she could stop an army of millions with her sword. With her around, there was no need for him to worry. As for his body, it was already full of wounds. There was not a single part of his body that was intact. In Li Fengmu's opinion, it was not a big problem. In this battle, it was already not easy to keep one's life intact. Sometimes, why was there a need to demand so much? After Princess Mingzhu swept her gaze across the field, she slashed out with her sword. This time, her target was Zuoxia. For Princess Mingzhu, what she needed to do was to quickly kill off the opponent's top fighting strength. This was the only way to minimize the losses of the World Alliance. "Let's go!" Right Blind immediately shouted. As soon as he finished speaking, Blind Zwa immediately turned around and left. Since the woman could still use her sword, it meant that she still had some strength left. To be able to kill experts of the same level with such ease, just how terrifying was this person's strength? They couldn't figure it out, but they didn't dare to think about it anymore. Now, how to protect their lives had become the most important problem for them. After all, who would be willing to lose their life if they could live? The affairs of the world were unpredictable. No one could predict what would happen. When Li Fengmu saw that the two of them had actually fled in such a manner, he could not help but be stunned. Their actions were a little too straightforward. This was not the demeanor of an expert. Princess Mingzhu, on the other hand, did not look like she was going to let them go. She held her sword and charged forward, ready to kill Blind Zwa and right Blind Zwa. Li Fengmu did not chase after them. Instead, he focused all his attention on the battle below. How to end it next seemed to be the most important thing. "Kill!" Li Fengmu shouted in a low voice. At the same time, he immediately turned the tip of his sword and charged into the battle. Since the opportunity for victory had arrived, he only needed to kill all the generals below who had some strength. It would be even more satisfying if he could kill the other party without leaving a single one alive. Moreover, the cultivators of the Sword Heart Realm and the allies of the God Realm had lost more than half of their lives because of this chaotic battle. If he did not intervene, these people would probably die in this battle. When the cultivators of the Beast Realm saw the old monster charging down, their hearts instantly turned gloomy. What little morale they had left had already disappeared, and all of them were thinking of running away. How could the alliance that had been sullen for so long let them go so easily? They immediately began to chase after them. In Spring Sun City, Xiaoyang and Bailizi had not had any sparks to speak of for a long time. In fact, the two of them looked like old friends who had not seen each other for a long time as they spoke these tepid words. The two of them had their own plans in their hearts, so they did not dare to act rashly. Instead, they changed to a more relaxed way of communication. If you leave the flowing cloud realm now, we might have a chance to become friends. Xiaoyang said coldly. It was almost impossible for them to become friends. Not to mention the atrocities they had committed in 100 Prosper City and West Wind City. With the greed of the beast realm, they probably would not have any friends. Moreover, from the beginning, they had been thinking about how to swallow the Four-Realm Alliance and take it for their own use. Bailizi smiled. He felt that this young man was incomparably quick-witted and even very smart. But why did he have a trace of fantasy at this time? Even if the beast realm had friends, they should at least be friends with similar strength. And such a weak alliance, a small world that even the White Bear tribe could not resist, what qualifications did they have to be friends with the Wanshou realm? It seemed that this human cultivator had always had these bad habits. They always thought that everything would develop according to their imagination. Wasn't that a little too childish? And such a way of doing things was really a little ridiculous. It seems that you have already made your choice. Then it's fine, it's just a battle. Xiaoyang said indifferently. Since there was no chance of returning, there was naturally no need to continue talking. Moreover, it was useless to say more. It might even make the other party feel that the people of the Flowing Cloud Realm were all idiots, and they would look down on them even more in the future. Moreover, if they wanted to negotiate peace, Xiaoyang also needed to let the Beast Realm settle the score. Most likely, the most powerful side would not agree. It seems that you have made your choice, but is it worth it for you to do this? In the Flowing Cloud Realm, there is only one Xiaoyang. The current two can't do anything alone. Why bother? Bailizi said. Chapter 2443. Black Peak took the lead. He felt that this was a great opportunity for him to make a name for himself in the world. The Black Tiger tribe had always had a saying of the 4 tigers. They were the 4 people who held the Black Tiger Xianfang. However, Black Peak felt that no matter if it was in terms of strength or insight, he was the top existence compared to the other 3. Therefore, how could he agree with this view? Therefore, if he could kill Bai Li Song with his own hands, he would definitely stand out from the rest. It was even possible for him to take over the throne of the Tiger King in the future. At least until now, he could feel that the Tiger King thought highly of him, obviously more than the other 3. It didn't matter what state Bai Li Song was in when he killed him. As long as he died in his hands, that was enough. Such a battle record was enough for him to be famous in the realm of beasts. He might even receive more attention and resources because of this. Thinking of this, Black Peak was extremely excited. He would soar to the sky and stand out from the rest. It was as if a bright future was right in front of him and within his reach. Everything happened too quickly, causing Black Peak to have another thought in his mind. At this moment, Bai Li Song naturally sensed the pursuit of Black Peak and the rest. Instantly, he couldn't help but frown again. He didn't expect the Tiger King to really want his life. Until now, they were still chasing him relentlessly. Therefore, this was a little unexpected. Moreover, his actions just now didn't scare these little fellows out of their wits. This made Bai Li Song feel a little strange. But now that they were chasing him, it made him feel very uncomfortable. Bai Li Song's injuries were already very serious. If this continued, it would only get worse. By the time he ran out of energy, he would most likely be dead. Therefore, he had to think of a way to break out of this situation. Therefore, Bai Li Song immediately stopped and looked back. He was prepared to use the lightning spear in his hand to kill one of them first. If he couldn't scare them off, then there was nothing he could do. Since he had already come to this step, then he had to try. However, Black Peak and the others were also extremely vigilant. They knew what the situation was going to be like. In a situation where they were prepared, they directly stopped and even retreated a lot. This was to maintain a safe distance and ensure that they would not be killed. After seeing this scene, Bai Lisong's heart was almost filled with despair. He would never have thought that the other party had already planned everything. In fact, he had even seen through the current situation and made sufficient preparations. Therefore, under such circumstances, it would still be difficult to take the life of one of them. It could even be said that this was almost impossible. As a result, it was almost impossible for him to use psychological warfare to scare off the other party so that he would have a chance to escape. Now, Bai Lisong had almost fallen into despair. He was unwilling to resign himself to death and continued to flee. Since the Tiger King hadn't come personally, how could he possibly give up his life here? Therefore, now that things had developed to this point, he could only hope that something unexpected would happen. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to continue living. Actually, Bai Lisong knew that if he didn't die, the Tiger King wouldn't be able to live in peace and would be on tenterhooks all day long. Moreover, today was a good opportunity to kill him. How could the other party miss it? It could be said that from the beginning, Bai Lisong's ending was already set. He was going to die without a doubt. No one was willing to have a hidden danger that could threaten their own tribe at any time. Only a dead man could do nothing. Therefore, only after Bai Lisong died could they be completely at ease. Or else, who knew what would happen in the future? The realm of beasts had always been like this. They would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. This also led to the continuous occurrence of massacres. It was fine if they didn't make a move, but once they did, they would definitely kill all of them and not leave any hidden dangers. Suddenly, Bai Lisong didn't turn his head. The lightning spear in his hand directly left his hand. This was because his strength had already begun to drain. If this continued, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to do any damage. Therefore, Bai Lisong had to do this. He had to use his battle experience to throw this spear. If he could kill one person, it would definitely be worth it. Black Peak, who was charging at the front, saw the lightning spear suddenly coming towards him. Instantly, he was even more shocked. His first reaction was to retreat immediately and dodge this spear. As long as he dodged, then killing the exhausted Bai Lisong would be a piece of cake. However, when he retreated, two forces pushed him out directly. The lightning spear directly pierced through Black Peak's body. Black Peak turned his head and looked at the two of them. His eyes were filled with confusion. Why did this happen? Black Shadow, Black Sun. Even if you go to hell, you can still continue to look down on us. Hearing this, Black Peak's heart instantly sank. His divine sense also began to dim. Hei Ing and Hei Sun continued to give chase. The two of them were determined to get their hands on this contribution. On the main battlefield, the Tiger King sat at the same spot. With a wave of his hand, he ordered many powerful people to start killing the remaining forces of the White Bear tribe. Although Bai Lisong left behind some ruthless words before he left, it was very likely that he would return to seek revenge. However, in the eyes of the Tiger King, that was something impossible. 3 Fourth Order Martial Emperor tribesmen were enough to kill Bai Lisong, who was already on the verge of death. Therefore, those ruthless words were just empty words. It was something that could not be realized. Therefore, the Tiger King also saw through it. He only needed to rest for a while to completely suppress his injuries. Then he could continue to advance and sweep through the southeast region. If those tribes were sensible and surrendered, he could still consider letting them continue to exist as his claws and fangs. If they did not submit, then he would let them die. After all, the great cause was already in front of them. How could they miss out on it? Xiao Yang, who was hiding in the dark, also slowly walked out. Because 3 of the 4 tigers had already left and the Tiger King was heavily injured, it was a great opportunity to kill him. Princess Mingzhu stood at the same spot. The smile on her face also became wider. This time, they had made the right bet. Black Peak and the rest had really left. In this way, they could kill the Tiger King. Once the Tiger King was dead, then it would not be difficult to chase after Bai Li Song, who was already at the end of his road. This was a wonderful situation. Now, Princess Mingzhu was even more impressed with Xiaoyang. No wonder he dared to come alone. His methods were indeed extraordinary. Chapter 2444. A young man in a black robe walked out of the cave. Because his aura was completely concealed, almost no one could detect his presence. Even if someone did, they didn't think much of it. After all, why would they think so much about a seemingly ordinary person who posed no threat? Moreover, their attention was now on how to eliminate the remaining members of the White Bear tribe. The White Bear tribe was a very large tribe, and there were many of them left behind. To eliminate them completely was not something that could be done in a short period of time. They even had to spend a lot of time on it. Immediately, Xiaoyang rose into the air and looked at Tiger King with murderous eyes. At this moment, Tiger King also felt the murderous intent, and his heart couldn't help but tremble. Could it be that he had some kind of backup plan? However, no matter how he thought about it, he felt that something was wrong. The young man in the black robe raised one of his hands, and traces of lightning energy were gathering at an extremely fast speed. Tiger King immediately saw the black robe clearly. It was Bai Wuxi's black robe, and the move he used was the furious lightning god throw. Wasn't Bai Wuxi already dead? Why would he appear on this battlefield again? Or could it be that Bai Li Song's escape was to lure his capable guards away to create an opportunity for this young man to kill him? Bai Wuxi's intelligence was said to be the best in the world, and the current situation might be his doing. At this moment, Tiger King felt that it was very possible. If they wanted to unify the southeast region, then they had to take action. However, such a method was undoubtedly crossing a mountain of blades and a sea of flames. It was an extremely great risk. Tiger King found it hard to accept. He didn't understand what was going on. If the White Bear tribe wanted to use such a method to kill him, wouldn't the price they would have to pay be a little too high? However, Tiger King also knew that if he died and Bai Li Song was still alive, then the Black Tiger tribe might not be able to stop him. Suddenly, Tiger King thought of an even more terrifying possibility. Bai Xingyun and the rest weren't dead, and the White Bear tribe just released fake news in order to tempt them into attacking. Courting death? After the Tiger King had such a thought in his mind, he smiled bitterly. Now he was even more confused about what was going on. There were many clues within that were even more incomprehensible. However, the Tiger King did not know that the black robe was indeed Bai Wuxi's, but under the robe was not Bai Wuxi. As the power gathered, some of the people present suddenly noticed Xiaoyang. Some martial emperors even tried to stop Xiaoyang. However, when those experts rushed up, a flame soared into the sky and formed a wall, directly isolating them. Currently, Xiao Hui's strength was comparable to a fourth-order martial king. His strength was enough to make any martial king below the fourth-order martial king apprehensive, not daring to confront him directly. And for Xiaoyang, this little bit of time was enough. Thunder God's Fury Throw. At the next moment, the Thunder Spear, which was still accumulating power, flew out of his hand and charged toward the Tiger King with immense power. When the Tiger King saw this scene, he immediately let out a furious roar and immediately used the last bit of strength in his body to block this attack. He only needed to hold on for a while longer and wait for the experts in the tribe to come to his rescue. Then he would be able to survive. In this way, the initiative of the overall situation could be regained. Since the battle had already begun, there was no need to think too much. As long as he could survive, it was enough. Green sky, sword rain. In the next moment, Tiger King's soul could not help but tremble because he felt the sword chi falling from the sky. The Tiger King raised his head and looked at the dense rain of swords falling down. Suddenly his heart trembled. He had also thought of another possibility. In the myriad beast realm, there were not many who used swords. Moreover, To be able to use them to such an extent, it was almost as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. A sense of conspiracy spread in Tiger King's heart. Only now did he know that in this situation he might just be a chess piece. The sword rain fell very quickly, and Tiger King could not resist at all. Suddenly, it fell continuously and pierced his flesh. The excruciating pain made Tiger King roar again and again. Even the defense that he had prepared previously was completely shattered at this moment. The lightning spear directly penetrated Tiger King's forehead. Tiger King's pupils dilated continuously. He looked in front of him, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. He really could not understand how things had turned out this way. Wasn't it all planned out? Why did it turn out this way? Who was the one who set this trap? The more Tiger King thought about it, the more aggrieved he felt. In the next moment, Tiger King's last bit of consciousness was cut off because Xiaoyang had arrived and directly hit his soul with a secret technique, causing it to dissipate. When the experts rushed through Xiaohua's defense line and realized that their Tiger King was dead, they were all terrified. Even the Tiger King was gone. In that case, what were they worth? Xiaohua also took advantage of the fact that the other party was in a daze to immediately go to Xiaoyang's side and swallow Tiger King's corpse. Such a great tonic naturally needed to be digested properly. Avenge Tiger King. At this moment, someone stood up and roared angrily. In an instant, the warriors of the Black Tiger tribe became even more furious. They wanted to swarm forward and kill the ferocious beast that killed their Tiger King. Xiaoyang did not seem to care. He only smiled faintly and clenched his fist. A lightning spear was rapidly gathering in his hand. Thunder God's furious throw. After seeing this, the anger in everyone's hearts was suppressed again. Since this person could use this move to kill Tiger King, would it not be easier for him to kill them? Even though everyone was extremely unhappy and wanted to kill that madman to vent their hatred, no one was willing to be the one to stand out. After all, the risk was very high. They could lose their lives at any time. One man and one spear had frightened the armies of the Black Tiger tribe and the Multicolor tribe. If you don't want to live, then come. Let's see how powerful my Thunder God's furious throw is. Xiaoyang laughed coldly. He held the spear and chased after by Li Song. Since he had set up this trap and it had developed very well, he naturally had to end it well. Otherwise, leaving behind future troubles would be a disaster for their world. Chapter 2445. Blind Left and Blind Right, who were hiding further away, were even more shocked when they saw how the situation had changed in an instant. Who would have thought that the situation would develop so quickly? Previously, the Black Tiger tribe was still in high spirits, and it was very likely that they would conquer the southeast together. But in the blink of an eye, everything became nothing. In fact, even the Tiger King had lost his life in this turmoil. Isn't this person a little too terrifying? Blindswood gasped and said with a trembling voice. With such a scheme, he was able to easily kill 2 experts while reaping the benefits of the battle. If such a move were to be made known to the public, it would probably shock everyone in the world. Edited by Lifer, Fingerfox. Perhaps the entire Wansho realm would also be affected by this plan. Such a move and ingenuity was even more shocking. Blind Yu subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva because he had never expected such an outcome. Originally, he thought that Xiaoyang would have to go through several tough battles to achieve his goal when both sides suffered losses. But who would have thought that it would be so easy? From the beginning of stirring up the situation in the southeast to now, everything was about to be settled. His most dangerous battle was probably to kill Qi. Now, Blind Right was completely convinced. It was indeed a very terrifying thing to have such a person as an opponent. Fortunately, they did not make the wrong choice when they were at the Sword Scar Abyss. Otherwise, they would probably end up the same way. Now that they thought about it, they were able to survive until now because they were slick enough. Otherwise, they would have lost their lives long ago. If he can really help us, Our Blue Wolf tribe might have a chance to unify the Southeast, Blind Right said with a sigh. But Blind Right was also very clear that this was just an extravagant hope. Based on the current situation, if he wanted to upgrade his tribe to a tribe, he would definitely need to be a 5th-level Martial Emperor Almighty. This was because this was the most basic standard. Only such an expert would have the right to speak for him. In addition, which of the surrounding tribes was easy to provoke. If they wanted to unify by force, they would probably suffer more and more losses. In the end, they might even be taken advantage of by others. However, Blind's thoughts were different. He smiled, because he knew that once the Black Tiger tribe took down the White Bear tribe, they would definitely continue to advance. At that time, the Blue Wolf tribe would either submit or be destroyed. But now that the Tiger King was dead, they would probably die in such a situation, and they would no longer have to worry about whether to submit or fight to the death. This problem also ended with the Tiger King's death. "We can go to the southeast together," Blind Right said with a smile. Blind Right was a little confused. How was this possible? At least for now. He felt that the possibility of this matter was very small. The situation has changed. I'm afraid that the Black Tiger tribe will be besieged by many other tribes. When the time comes, they will definitely retreat. Blindsville laughed. Which tribe would not plunder and oppress the surrounding tribes? And which tribe would not hold a grudge in their hearts? Once the absolute power collapsed and there was a huge change, then they would definitely be attacked by the masses. This was also the reason why every tribe would hold back when they made a move. They were afraid of such variables. Everyone was well aware of what the environment of the myriad beast realm was like. They had long been used to and adapted to such a situation. Since it was already here, they could only accept it. After Shingong Chi of the Multicolor tribe died, there were already some tribes who were ready to make a move and wanted to divide it. Then why did they not make a move? Wasn't it because Shengong Hong had sided with the Black Tiger tribe and used their power to suppress those tribes? Now that the 3 5th-level martial emperors in the southeast were gone, the strength of the tribes would not be too different. At that time, if they all wanted to occupy a position, the situation in the southeast would change completely. Then there would be endless wars. Previously, Xiaoyang had also said that they should wait and see. Wasn't this hinting for them to wait? They would wait until those tribes were badly injured and their vitality was greatly damaged before they came to clean up the mess. This way they could make a plan. Of course, Blind Right also remembered that Xiaoyang had also said that they needed to plan slowly. It was difficult to become a fatty in one bite. They might even choke to death. The main reason was that the Blue Wolf tribe had lost all their operations in the Sword Heart World's Western Plains battlefield. As a result, they were still recovering and could not control too many places. Although Blind Right and Blind Right were now 4th-level martial emperors, there were only the 2 of them. They could guard their own land. But if they wanted to expand, they were afraid that they did not have enough manpower. How long do you think that old man by Li Song can live? Blind Right asked with a smile. Blind Right was very firm and said, he won't live past today. In fact, they were very clear that in such a situation, Xiaoyang naturally would not let him go. Moreover, the direction he was going was very clear. That was to chase after Bai Li Song. The purpose of this action was to eliminate the source of trouble and eliminate all future troubles. At this moment, Xiaoyang also chased after him and found Black Peak's body. As for what exactly happened here, Xiaoyang was not very clear. However, he could be sure that the direction he was chasing was not wrong. Princess Mingzhu, who came secretly from the other side, also followed again. Until now, they had always been pursuing a goal, and that was to not expose themselves if they could. Hiding in the dark and launching a sneak attack was always the most convenient and could save a lot of trouble. Therefore, in the end, he attacked Tiger King with great fanfare. He wanted to give them an illusion and make it difficult for them to distinguish what had happened for a while. Such a method of confusing the public was also enough to make it difficult for the Wan Beast realm to figure out who was dealing with them. Some people would even think that this was just an internal strife and was not a big deal at all. After all, the Wan Beast realm had always been in favor of internal strife. Once they knew that it was done by outsiders, these tribes would probably unite. No matter how their own people fought, it was their business. However, if outsiders intervened, the meaning was different. Furthermore, the views of those large clans were never small squabbles. There was still some human feelings mixed in. Otherwise, how could they have been prosperous for so long? In the Wan Beast realm, the position of the 5 big tribes could be said to have never been shaken. Chapter 2446. Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu were still concealing their auras. After all, they were going for a surprise attack this time, so they had to be careful. Moreover, there was no need to spend too much effort on a battle that could be easily resolved. Now, they had already completed more than half of their plan. Of course, if they could not kill Bai Li Song, it could only be considered as half done. They had set up such a huge plan to cause chaos in the southeastern region. If Bai Li Song was still alive, he would probably be able to suppress the chaos here by himself after he recovered from his injuries. Therefore, that would not do. Perhaps Bai Li Song would choose to do the same thing as Xiao Yang when he heard about his clan's crushing defeat and create trouble. It would also give them a headache. Therefore, this hidden danger had to be completely eliminated. It could be said that Bai Li Song was in a terrible situation at the moment. Not only did the people from the Black Tiger tribe want to kill them, but so did Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu. Their goal was the same, which was to eliminate the source of the trouble. The ending was especially important now. As long as they could kill Bai Li Song, it would be a perfect ending. By then, they could also do it in other places. Although the southeastern region was a barren land, it would be impossible for the other forces to remain indifferent once chaos broke out. Perhaps, if he spent more effort, he would be able to attract even more forces to pester him. By then, they might even be able to affect the situation as a whole. However, it would still be difficult to shake the entire 10,000 beasts realm with this. After all, the truly powerful forces might not even look at this place properly. Very soon, Xiao Yang caught up with Bai Li Song and noticed them. Bai Li Song did not have much energy left after reaching this point. Of course, he had already decided to fight to the death with his remaining energy. As long as he could kill Heiying and Hei Sun, he could still live. If he continued to flee, he was afraid that when his strength was completely exhausted and his injuries worsened, it would be time for him to die. Therefore, if he used his remaining strength to get rid of them, he would be able to find a relatively safe place to go into seclusion and plan for the future. However, Heiying and Hei Sun did not kill him either. Especially after they used Bai Li Song to kill Hei Feng, they became even more vigilant. They all knew that as long as they continued to drag things out, Bai Li Song would definitely die. If he were to forcefully kill them now, he might have to pay the price. He might even lose his life. Therefore, they all knew what to choose in their hearts. In any case, he wasn't in a hurry right now. He just needed to maintain a safe distance and pull. In any case, your injuries are more serious, so we can continue to waste time with you. As long as I don't give you a chance to breathe, that's enough. If Bai Li Song retreated, they would advance. If the enemy advanced, they would retreat. Bai Li Song was infuriated by this tug of war. It had to be said that these two fellows were really cunning. Their calculations were perfect. Heiying and Hei Sun were also enjoying themselves. It was a great feeling to be able to toy with such an expert, like a monkey. A tiger on the plains will be bullied by dogs. Bai Li Song gnashed his teeth in hatred. Moreover, these dogs were very smart. They would bark beside you without attacking, which was really annoying. When Bai Li Song looked at Heiying and Hei Sun's expressions again, he was so furious that his lungs were about to explode. However, he could only go on like this in the end. Even though he knew the effect was not very good and he had to think of a way to break out of this situation, the other party's pulling made him feel like he could not exert his strength. It was extremely painful. Soon, Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu landed too. They stood in 3 different positions, forming a stalemate. Initially, they were prepared to launch a sneak attack from the dark. However, the field of vision was too wide, and there was nowhere to hide. Moreover, they were spotted by He Sun, so they had no choice but to land. He Ing and He Sun became alert when they saw the two people, because they did not know if they were friends or foes. More importantly, they could not detect their opponent's auras. They could not figure out their opponent's realms, so they dared not fight recklessly. On the contrary, Bai Li Song became agitated at this moment. His eyes were almost burning with flames. This was because he recognized the black robe. He had personally given it to Bai Wuxi. However, it was now being worn by a young man whom he did not know. What was going on? Bai Li Song had been in seclusion for decades. He did not care about worldly affairs. Now that there was such a huge change, he was even more caught off guard. It was extremely difficult for him to gather any information. Therefore, he still could not figure out what was going on. What kind of conspiracy was driving them to fall into such an awkward situation? You don't have to care about us. Just focus on killing this old man. After all, we came here for the same purpose. As for who killed him, it doesn't matter. As long as he's dead, it's fine, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Bai Li Song maintained his original form. Even if he did not have much strength, the destructive power of a punch from such a huge body could not be ignored. Black Shadow and He Sun looked at the two of them cautiously. They did not make a move. The appearance of these two mysterious people was too strange. They did not even know if they were friends or foes. It was possible that when they attacked, the two of them would sneak up on them from behind. Since the two of you want Bai Li Song's head, we'll give you a chance. Go ahead and take it, Black Shadow said with a smile. Since they could not confirm whether the other party was friend or foe, they could only wait and see. Moreover, since the two of them had sent themselves here, they could use them to test the waters. They could test how powerful the White Bear tribe's patriarch was. If Bai Li Song was killed, they could just sit back and reap the benefits. If they were killed, it meant that it was not the time to make a move yet. Therefore, they could only continue to wait. They were not in a hurry. After all, the current situation was like this. They only needed to wait. There was no need to take any risks. When the time came, they might even lose their lives. If that was the case, it would be a loss for them. Xiaoyang was also stunned for a moment. He could also guess what the two of them were thinking, but he just laughed it off. Chapter 2447. Princess Mingzhu, on the other hand, looked around vigilantly. To them, the three people present could not leave alive. As long as they could hide their whereabouts, they would continue to hide. Therefore, the best way was to kill them all. Moreover, the two of them were fourth-level martial emperors. If they went to the Four-Realm Alliance in the future, they would be a huge threat to them. Therefore, if they had the chance to kill them, it would be the best outcome. However, they were now in a tripartite confrontation. If anyone dared to make a move, they would be attacked by both sides. How to fight from now on was a big problem. It was not easy to solve. It could be said that they were all on guard against each other to prevent themselves from being attacked. Why don't we attack together? Since we all want to kill him, it's a win-win situation. Xiaoyang teased. He Sun only sneered. The situation was still unclear. Therefore, he did not know what to do next. However, he had never let down his guard. After all, this kind of confrontation made him feel very uncomfortable. He did not know anything about these two people who came out of nowhere. As a result, it was quite a headache to deal with. The black figure did not say a word because he was not sure what was going on either. Why are you wearing Wuxi's robe? Bai Li Song asked angrily. Now, Bai Li Song could no longer maintain his calm. He also wanted to know what was going on. Therefore, he wanted to know something from the conversation. After hearing this, Black Shadow and He Sun's expressions changed drastically. Although Bai Li Song did not know, the two of them knew very well that Bai Wuxi died in the battle in the Drifting Cloud Realm. Therefore, there was only one possibility. Xiaoyang was here. As for the identity of the woman in white, it was obvious. She was Princess Mingzhu. Huh. I didn't expect you to be so bold to come to the Wanshou realm. Black Shadow sneered. Hearing this, Bai Lisong couldn't help but be stunned. He was even more confused now. He Sun had already started preparing for battle. Since they were cultivators from the flowing cloud realm, they were enemies and could start fighting at any moment. After his identity was exposed, Xiaoyang bitterly smiled helplessly. Who would have thought that this black robe would actually become a flaw? Speaking of which, it was indeed somewhat laughable. But it didn't matter. They were all going to die here anyway. As long as they were killed, no one would be able to recognize this robe. Princess Mingzhu was also prepared. Since the conversation had already reached this point, it would be meaningless even if she continued to quibble. So if you want to fight, then let's fight. What's the point? By the way, Senior Bai Li Bai Wuxi's entire family was killed by him. Now we can put aside our grudges and let you take your revenge first. He Sun said as he took a few steps back. The attitude of the two was also very clear, which was to provoke a war between the two sides first. At that time, they would reap the benefits after the fight. As soon as Xiaoyang said that, Bai Lisong's attitude changed. He glared at Xiaoyang. It can be said that most of the elites of the White Bear tribe died in his world. According to the information we received, the two of them were the ones commanding the battle, Black Shadow added. Now, He Sun and Black Shadow were not going to continue because it was enough for them to say all that. Although their words were short, they could completely stir up the grudges between the two sides. In that case, they could wait for the results to come out before ending the fight. They're right. I did it. Xiaoyang did not beat around the bush and openly admitted it. Faced with such an attitude, both sides were slightly stunned. Could it be that he really had something to rely on since he was so straightforward? You choose first, Xiaoyang said indifferently. Since it had already come to this point, there was no need for scheming, so it was better to be straightforward. Princess Mingzhu looked coldly and said, I'll stop the two of them. As soon as she finished speaking, Princess Mingzhu drew her sword and charged towards Black Shadow and He Sun. Although it was difficult for her to fight against two people of the same level, she was confident that she could fight on. She could even kill them. As for Bai Lisong, although he was in the 5th level, with his current strength, it was already difficult for him to cause any trouble. Moreover, with Xiaoyang's strength and methods, he could also end the battle quickly. Green sky, sword rain. Princess Mingzhu did not hold back, and her sword Qi swept out in all directions. Black Shadow and He Sun immediately stopped underestimating her, and at that moment they were ready for battle. The news they received previously said that the woman was in the 3rd level of the martial emperor realm and had the strength of a 4th level. However, it seemed that her aura was already in the same level as them. Under such circumstances, if they still underestimated her, they might suffer a great loss. Xiaoyang moved as well. He drew his Thunderfire Divine sword and charged forward like a bolt of lightning. Bai Lisong, who was in a rage, threw a punch. However, in the next moment, Xiaoyang suddenly changed his direction, and the sword in his hand left his hand and pierced into the top of his head. 7 steps of the barbarian god. When Xiaoyang appeared again, he was already stepping on the sword hilt, and the Thunderfire Divine sword pierced into Bai Lisong's head. He knelt on the ground and could no longer move. He Sun was even more shocked when he saw this. When he felt a chill on his back, he also felt heat. In the next moment, a strong flame spewed out, and it completely enveloped He Sun, causing him great pain. This change was extremely fast, and Black Shadow was caught off guard. However, he was now entangled with Princess Mingzhu, so how could he care about He Sun? In this battle, Bai Lisong did not have much strength to continue fighting, and his reaction was already slow. As long as he was faster, he could be killed. As for Black Shadow and He Sun, although there were 2 of them, due to the lack of information, they only needed to use some tricks to kill each other. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyang flashed and charged towards Black Shadow. Since he was going to kill them, he had to be decisive and not give them any time to breathe. If he could end the battle quickly, he could not be soft-hearted. Otherwise, if they escaped, the secret of this place would be leaked, and it would cause trouble. Chapter 2448. After getting rid of He Ying and He Sen, Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu looked at each other and smiled. So far, the curtains could finally be drawn to the end of the plot they had set up. Furthermore, it was perfect. In this battle, they had killed Tiger King. Even the ancestor of the White Bear tribe by Li Song had died here. It could be said that the entire southeast region of the realm of beasts would undergo an earth-shaking change because of this. The situation here would also undergo a huge change because of this. At the very least, if there wasn't a powerful tribe to lead the southeast, it was likely that this place would go through a long period of killing. Only a powerful person who could control the situation and establish a new tribe would be able to calm this place down. As a result, the southeast region naturally would not have the strength to deal with the four-realm alliance. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, was handling the scene in an orderly manner. Every detail was done very carefully. Although this wasn't very meaningful, it was very safe. Even if someone came to investigate, they wouldn't be able to find any clues. If there were any clues left behind, the chaos here might end because of this. Therefore, there were still some things that needed to be done to save face. As the saying went, 100 secrets would have a flaw. What Xiao Yang needed to do was to not let any clues be found. Even if you feel that something is wrong, from the perspective of the situation, it is still acceptable. Princess Mingzhu was not very good at these things. Therefore, she stood aside. At the same time, she spread her divine consciousness around and began to be on guard. Right now, the work of wrapping things up was also very important. This was because the situation here would evolve to a certain extent, and it had something to do with how they were wrapping things up now. Moreover, what they wanted was to stir up the entire realm of beasts. On the other side, in the White Bear tribe's nest, Tiger King's death in battle and the person who killed him had disappeared without a trace. This caused the Black Tiger tribe to suddenly become a group of dragons without a leader. The Multicolor tribe also lost its backbone because of Xingong Hong's death. The two tribes looked at each other and did not know how to proceed. However, their target didn't change at all. They were still slaughtering the White Bear tribe. After all, the current White Bear tribe was an arrow at the end of its flight, a soft persimmon that could be bullied by anyone. Thus, they did not feel any psychological burden when they attacked. However, this dispute also began to change with the passage of time. In the Multicolor tribe, some people also realized that since the Tiger King was no longer around, they no longer needed to be wary in the southeast. They could only continue to survive by relying on others. Therefore, some of the previous agreements seemed to have undergone some subtle changes following the Tiger King's death. However, now that the Black Tiger army was here, they had the advantage in numbers. Therefore, the Multicolor tribe could only continue to endure. However, some almighties had already begun to leave and return to their own territories. After all, even if the Black Tiger tribe wanted to launch a punitive expedition against the Multicolor tribe, they would have to first eliminate the White Bear tribe's forces before it would be the Multicolor tribe's turn. Therefore, they had a long period of time to prepare, and they didn't need to worry too much. Blind Left and Blind Right, who had been watching from the sidelines all this while, also heaved a sigh of relief when they saw the situation. Before this, if the Tiger King was still alive, they really wouldn't have dared to go against the Black Tiger army. After all, in the face of absolute power, their little strength was still insufficient. However, who would have thought that Xiao Yang would really seize the opportunity and kill the Tiger King? In Blind Left's opinion, since Xiao Yang had killed by Li Song, He Sen, He Ying, and the others would not be able to avoid it. Therefore, at the end of the day, it was inevitable that they would die. As he thought of this, Blind Left's heart calmed down a lot. In this overall situation, the Black Tiger tribe would most likely face a situation where their vitality would be greatly damaged. In this way, these tribes would have the opportunity to rise up. Blind Left, when do we make our move? Blind Right asked excitedly, eager to give it a try. Although Yu Xia's brain wasn't that good, because he was in the dark, he had already seen through many problems. Therefore, all they had to do next was to carry on with the plan. In fact, in their opinion, the two of them could also fight for the general situation in the southeast this time. They might even be able to gain more benefits. Even though this seemed somewhat unlikely, he still rubbed his hands together and wanted to give it a try. After all, the huge benefits were in front of him, and the opportunity had appeared. Everything was possible, so how could he turn a blind eye to it? Blind Left also saw an incomparably beautiful future, and he was also more rational. As long as they could take all of the territory of the White Bear tribe, it would be fine. Then they would develop step by step and suppress the other tribes. That way, they would still have a chance of success. However, Blind Left soon recalled Xiao Yang's warning. The situation was chaotic only because there were problems with the three tribes. However, the strength of the other tribes still existed. Therefore, there was no need to be the one who stood out, and they only needed to wait for the right time to make a move. Sometimes, the first to make a move might not necessarily gain much of an advantage. On the contrary, if they had planned for a long time and waited slowly, they would be able to maximize the benefits. Thinking of this, Blind Left calmed down and said, "Don't worry, let's continue to wait and see." As soon as these words came out, it was like a bucket of cold water that made Blind Left more or less unhappy. In this chaotic world, it was a good time to ride the wind and rise, but they had to miss this opportunity. However, Blind Left actually understood the logic behind this, but he felt a little uncomfortable. He felt that it was really uncomfortable to use these schemes and tricks to take things slowly. Although the Ashen Wolf tribe's vitality was greatly damaged in the Battle of the West Plains in the Sword Heart realm, with the strength of the two of them, it was enough to dominate a region in the southeast. Without the mighty 5th-level Martial Emperor, a 4th-level Martial Emperor was already in existence at the peak. Don't be anxious, we're enduring now only for the sake of a bigger plan in the future. Hurry back to the tribe immediately and tell the tribesmen to behave and not take the initiative to attack. In fact, it's okay to show weakness when necessary. The more strength we preserve at this juncture, the more land we can annex in the future. Blind Left touched his chin and said with a smile, Chapter 2449. With the passage of time, the situation in the southeast region of the Beast Realm was in chaos due to the death of the 3 5th-level Martial Emperors. The Black Tiger tribe seemed to be the most powerful and had preserved the most strength. It could also be said that they had preserved the most strength among the 3 tribes. They had also invaded the largest area and gained the most benefits. However, the Black Tiger tribe was also having a headache because they were also facing a lot of dangers. When the Tiger King was still alive, the Black Tiger tribe was arrogant and despotic in the southeast region. They exploited the resources of other tribes and could be said to have accumulated resentment for a long time. In the current situation, the Tiger King had died in battle. Even among the 4 great tiger generals, only He Kuang was left. He Kuang also did not participate in the battle because he had fainted during the battle. Therefore, he was lucky enough to escape the disaster and become the strongest existence of the Black Tiger tribe. However, he was still unable to save the situation alone because the surrounding tribes had already joined forces and were obviously preparing to attack the Black Tiger tribe. They wanted to settle all the old and new grudges that had been suppressed over the years. In this way, although the Black Tiger tribe had just taken over the territory of the White Bear tribe, they had no choice but to retreat to their base camp immediately and did not dare to think about expanding. As for the White Bear tribe, which was already on the verge of extinction, the remaining people were now facing a situation where they were homeless and defeated. Even if they united, their strength was not even comparable to the top 100 tribes. Therefore, they could only leave their homes and go to other places to find their own place of survival. The complete extinction of the White Bear tribe also caused great turmoil in the territory that they were originally in charge of. There were endless battles between the 3 tribes. All of them wanted to fight for a bigger piece of territory. It could be said that the disputes were endless. On the contrary, the Grey Wolf tribe, which had always been extremely ambitious, was very calm in this chaos. They expressed that as long as they could get the territory that was originally offered to the White Bear tribe, they would not participate in this war. Some people could see clearly that the Tsang Lang tribe had already suffered a great loss. Even though they had blind left and blind right to support them, it was still too difficult for them to rely on the two of them to support the tribe. Even self-protection had become a problem. How could they think too much about expansion? Therefore, the Tsang Lang tribe also took back the land that originally belonged to them. But at the same time, they also avoided the possibility of war with other tribes. Such a steady style made many people feel that it was very normal, and there was nothing unusual about it. Looking at the Multicolor tribe, after they destroyed the contract with the Black Tiger tribe, they were also guarding the Multicolor mountain range, exhausted. But because they didn't have an absolute powerhouse overseeing them, they had a very difficult time. Although it was said that a starving camel was bigger than a horse, if there were many ants, they could still bite an elephant to death. Therefore, one of the three great tribes in the southeast was directly exterminated, while the other two didn't have it easy either. They were caught up in internal and external troubles and couldn't extricate themselves for a while. The southeastern region also fell into chaos because of this reason. It was as if everything had become irreversible. As for the other tribes, they didn't seem to have much interest in this barren land in the southeast. Therefore, no one stood up to annex this place, which made people feel a little strange. However, the situation in the southeast had become very strange, and it was difficult to see through. Many people said that the person who killed the Tiger King was Biwuxi. Moreover, in the White Bear tribe, only he had the talent to be able to perform the furious thunder god throw. Some people even thought more, and felt that the White Bear tribe had set up this trap to cause chaos in the entire southeast because they had suffered heavy losses in the battlefield in the Flowing Cloud world. However, they didn't expect the opposite, and the White Bear tribe was also unable to recover from this setback. However, there were many disturbances and possibilities in this, and they were endless. This was because after the end of the previous war, Biwuxi didn't appear again, no matter how much chaos there was in the southeast. It was also because of this that the tribes that were originally oppressed by the White Bear tribe dared to take action. No matter how the situation changed, as long as there was no absolute fear once the war started, then the war in the Myriad Beasts realm would become very crazy and even reach an incomprehensible stage. As for what kind of danger they would face in the future, that was a matter for the future. How much did it have to do with how much benefits they could obtain now? Xiaoyang, who was hiding in the Tsang Lang tribe, was still in the dark cave. He had set up many restrictions in the surroundings to prevent others from discovering him. During these days, he had also heard a lot of news, and he was very satisfied. Everything was going according to his expectations. Although the chaos in the entire southeast wasn't able to cause a stir in the Myriad Beasts realm, it was enough for them to reach this stage, at least for the Four-Realm Alliance. The next invasion that they would face would be less of the three great tribes' strength. In this way, the pressure would be much less. Princess Mingzhu sat at the side, looking like she was dozing off. She wasn't very good at these things. However, from the results, it was indeed very good. Princess Mingzhu was very satisfied with this. Fortunately, she and Xiaoyang came together, and under this situation of mutual help, their plan had already been implemented. Even Princess Mingzhu began to look forward to it. When the next plan was carried out, would the entire Myriad Beasts realm be involved in it? At that time, would such an external threat be completely dealt with? If it could be done, it would definitely be great news for the Four-Realm Alliance. Furthermore, they could even make more contributions because of this. After Zhuxia finished reporting the information, he revealed a calm smile. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that things would go so smoothly. He even had the intention of having his wish come true. Although he had planned this countless times in his heart, and even calculated every detail very well, he still felt that he hadn't thought it through enough. At least compared to Xiaoyang, he felt that his thoughts were still somewhat lacking. Leader Xiao, what should the Songlang tribe do next? Zhuoxia asked with a smile. Since there was a wise leader here, they naturally had to rely on him. Moreover, whether the Songlang tribe could develop into a tribe or not was also closely related to this young man in front of him. Moreover, Zhuoxia felt that Xiaoyang saw things more clearly than him. Chapter 2450. Xiaoyang shot a glance at him and knew in his heart that this greedy fellow had probably been restless for a long time. However, because he had tasted the sweetness of success, he deliberately asked for Lin Huang's opinion and wanted to unite all the points that he had neglected. However, it was not impossible to support the Songlang tribe. After all, they were afraid of Lin Huang. When the time came, he would have to think twice before doing anything. It was even acceptable to make them into puppets and help them up. Thinking of this, Xiaoyang's plan opened up again. In this case, it was indeed feasible. Let the Wanshou realm be controlled by their own people. When the time came, the Four Realms Alliance would have more peaceful days. After all, the cultivators of the Wanshou realm were brave and ruthless, and they loved to invade. If there was no one who could keep the situation under control, they would probably frantically expand outwards to ensure their own interests. If they were always in internal strife, it would naturally be difficult for them to expand in the future. As he thought about this, Xiaoyang was clear on how he should proceed. However, as for how far blinds could go, that would depend on their own abilities. After all, he was still an outsider. If some things were exposed, the Wanshou realm's attitude might change because of this. Don't worry, let them continue to fight. As far as I know, the number of experts who have died in these days can be counted with one hand. Xiaoyang smiled faintly and said. Left Blind nodded quickly. This was also the most difficult thing for him now. It could be said that his and Left Blind's cultivation realm and strength were among the best in the top 100 tribes. However, the core strength was a complete mess. To put it bluntly, they were extremely talented, but could only be limited because of their own inadequacies. It was difficult for them to achieve great things. Even if the two of them could stand their own family's land, it was still impossible for them to expand outwards. It was simple. Currently, there were only a few martial emperors in their tribe who could be counted on one hand. If the two of them had not broken through to the 4th level martial emperor in time after returning, the surrounding tribes would have attacked them long ago. Is there any news about the opportunity in the central region? Xiaoyang took a deep breath and asked. This was also what Xiaoyang was concerned about. When the time came, all the forces would go to fight for the opportunity. At that time, there would definitely be a war. At that time, he and Princess Mingzhu could find an opportunity to take advantage of it. If they could kill a few more powerful figures, it would definitely be a profitable business. Moreover, according to what Blindswa had said earlier, that opportunity was probably not simple. Even the expedition to the Four Realms Alliance was put aside for the time being. Many experts chose to stay behind and guard the Four Realms Alliance. This was enough to show how precious this opportunity was. According to rumors, the opportunity's birth. This was all calculated by them. However, as for whether they are trying to cover it up or not, I can't give you an accurate information because it's too far away. Left Blind sighed helplessly and shook his head. It could be said that after the news about the opportunity in the central region spread, Left Blind was already well aware that it was almost impossible for them to fight for it. Moreover, now that the southeastern region had developed into such a chaotic situation, if they left easily, they might cause a big mess. Therefore, since there was a possibility that they could proceed step by step, they naturally had to cherish it. In that case, you guys continue to stay here. Remember to inquire about the opportunity in the central region. You can even go there yourself. Xiaoyang thought about it and said. Left Blind was a little puzzled when he heard this. This was because he felt that it was a little risky to do so. Moreover, there were many things that were not suitable. After all, the southeastern region may seem chaotic now, but it's impossible for the gray wolf tribe to fish in troubled waters to gain more benefits. Your lack of strength is the crux of the problem. Therefore, there's no harm in taking a long-term view. Let them make a fuss. What's the harm in waiting for a few more years? Xiaoyang asked with a smile. Of course, he said that in a more relaxed manner. After all, the losses of the gray wolf tribe could not be completely recovered in a short period of time. However, after countless battles in the past few years, the strength of the surrounding tribes would definitely be weakened because of the battles. As the saying went, one side would be weakened while the other would be strengthened. I understand. Left Blind gave it some thought and said, since Blinds had already said so much, he understood that there was no point in thinking too much about it. Therefore, it was not a problem to play it safe. Sometimes, being too radical would bring disaster to oneself. Since that was the case, why should they take such a huge risk? Therefore, it was not bad to deal with things calmly sometimes. What's Master Xiao going to do next? Left Blind asked expectantly. As the saying went, the layout in the southeastern region was linked to one another, which led to the current situation. What would they do next that would cause that tribe to fall? Blind was looking forward to it even more. Xiaoyang tapped his fingers on the table gently a few times and said, Don't you think you're asking too much? As soon as he said that, Left Blind's face turned pale. I was rude. Please forgive me, Master Xiao. Left Blind lowered his head and said softly. Although they were now in a cooperative relationship, their worlds were still in a state of war after all. Moreover, most of the things that Xiaoyang did were done in secret. Once it was put out in the open, it would not be good. Moreover, the more he knew, the more dangerous it might be. Sometimes, if he accidentally let it slip, it might be a disaster. Xiaoyang waved his hand with a smile and said, Don't worry about it, you may leave. Only then did Left Blind bid farewell and leave in fear. When he thought of his big mouth, he regretted it. If he really angered Xiaoyang, it would be hard to predict what the consequences would be. After all, the southeastern region was in complete chaos, and Xiaoyang already wanted to get a lot of information. So the existence of the Canglong tribe was not that important anymore. After walking out of the cave, Left Blind was already sweating profusely. Just now he was indeed very scared. Once Xiaoyang turned hostile, how could he survive? Chapter 2451. After Zhuo Xiao left, Xiaoyang sneered, intentionally or otherwise. He did not expect Blind Zhuo to be tainted with some human habits. It was just that he did not know how to control it, which was why it seemed so abrupt. However, it was no longer important. As long as Blind Zhuo was fearful, everything would be fine. He was afraid that Blind Zhuo did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. If he asked too many questions, it would inevitably arouse suspicion. As for what to do next, Xiaoyang already had a plan in mind. However, he was not in a hurry to make a move. He only wanted to make a decision after the southeast was in complete chaos. However, there was still a flaw in the development of this matter. This was because he wanted to attract all the attention of the Wanshou realm to the southeast. However, he did not know that the other tribes did not have the slightest interest in this barren land. As a result, the strategy that he needed to adopt naturally had to be changed because of this. An unchanging plan would always be fatal. After all, there are always variables in every living thing. Moreover, the strength of the 10 great tribes was divided into upper, middle, and lower. The gap between the 3 levels was no small matter. For example, the 3 great tribes in the southeast belonged to the lower 3 tribes. Their strength only looked strong, but there was only 1/5 level martial emperor almighty in the sect. In the middle 3 tribes, there were 2/5 level almighties in the sect. As such, with their current strength, if they wanted to attack any of the middle 3 tribes, no matter which tribe it would be a headache for them. They might not even be able to match up to them. Regarding this, Xiaoyang also had a slight headache. Where are we going next? Princess Mingzhu walked over and asked softly. From Princess Mingzhu's point of view, they had stayed in this place for a long time. Since they could not shake the entire Wanshou realm, they had to quickly come up with a countermeasure and create more things to achieve their goal. Xiaoyang shook his head helplessly and said, "It's hard to say now." After saying that, his gaze began to wander quickly on the map. Choosing which tribe to attack next was an extremely important matter for them. In fact, he even needed to think deeply about it. The slightest mistake could not be tolerated. When Princess Mingzhu heard this, she smiled bitterly and helplessly. She also knew that their current strength was their real weakness. With the strength of the two of them, wanting to go against the strength of an entire tribe was simply a pipe dream. The reason why they were able to stir up trouble in the southeast was because they had a spy like the Blue Wolf tribe. In addition, they made use of the contradictions within to achieve their goal. If they were in another place, these methods might not be of much use. In fact, from Princess Mingzhu's point of view, the opportunity in the central region would become the key to stirring up a storm. However, at this point, no one could be certain. That kind of wait was very long, and it was hard to say when the dust would settle. For them, the only good news was that the In-Flame Realm's crazy counterattack had completely disrupted the deployment of the Wanshou realm. This gave the Four-Realm Alliance a chance to breathe. Otherwise, if this matter continued to develop, who knew what kind of situation it would be? Soon, Xiaoyang's gaze quickly fell on the west side of the map. Looking at that point, the smile on his lips became much wider. Princess Mingzhu's gaze quickly followed as she muttered, "Confusion tribe?" Xiaoyang nodded with a smile, and his finger firmly pointed on it. "This time we'll start with the Confusion tribe," Xiaoyang said. When Princess Mingzhu heard this, her brows furrowed even more. The Confusion tribe was the most strange tribe because among the 10 major tribes, it was divided into 3 classes, high, middle, and low. Each class was divided into 3 tribes. Only the Bewilderment tribe was excluded from the list. This was because the Confusion tribe's strength was the most difficult to estimate. This tribe's skill in using poison was unique in the Wanshou realm. No matter which tribe it was, they had to be courteous when they saw them. Otherwise, they might not even know how they lost their lives. It was also because of this that the Confusion tribe was more mysterious and also incomparably feared. In the west side of the Wanshou realm, it was also unified by the Confusion tribe and dominated a region. Even though the other tribes wanted a share, they did not dare to act rashly because of fear. Even though there were only 2 5th-level martial emperors in the Confusion tribe, such a configuration was enough to make the 3 upper tribes wary and not to underestimate them. Isn't it a little too risky? Princess Mingzhu's mouth twitched slightly and said, Princess Mingzhu had never thought about how to deal with the Mi-Jie tribe. In fact, in her subconscious, she directly skipped over it. After all, such a prickly existence, if she could ignore it, she should not bother about it. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, This Bewilderment tribe is as terrifying as a plague to all of you. However, to me, it is a gift to increase my strength. The Confusion tribe was good at using poison, and Xiaoyang was the ancestor of using poison. So how could he be afraid of them? In fact, Xiaoyang could even refine their poison power to increase his strength. Next, he wanted to stir up a storm in the central region, but he dared not rashly try because of his lack of strength and state. Therefore, this Bewilderment tribe naturally became the best way for him to increase his strength. Suddenly, Princess Mingzhu recalled that Han Fenglu in the Greenly realm used poison to control people's hearts. But Xiaoyang discovered it immediately and was even able to conceal it. In that case, Xiaoyang was also an extraordinary existence in terms of using poison. Furthermore, if he could make such a choice, then he must have his own reasons. If it was before, Princess Mingzhu would think that Xiaoyang's method was somewhat unreasonable. However, after going through so many things together, she could understand that this person was not as simple as she thought. Every step he took was probably carefully thought out. After all, not only did they have to prevent the Wanshou realm from invading, but they also had to return alive. Think about it. Who would be willing to give up their life in such a place? If they were not confident, why would they dare to try? All right, I'll listen to you. If there's anything you need help with, just let me know. I'll cooperate with you, said Princess Mingzhu. Chapter 2452. Above the Sword Scar Abyss. Although a long time had passed, Li Fengmu and Li Chunyi would still come over to take a look when they were free every day. This was because they were hoping that the white-robed youth with a jade-like face would walk out. However, as more and more time passed, their hearts became more and more uncertain. However, they still firmly believed that a miracle would happen at any time. Even though the chances were extremely slim, they still had to wait. In fact, this had almost become their habit. Even when the jade-like Bai Jian was about to become a joke, they did not believe that he would fall and never stand up again. He was someone who had created several miracles. Moreover, his arrogance was an unstoppable existence. Therefore, how could he fall so easily? Moreover, since he had chosen such an opportunity, he was naturally prepared. He could also break through his own obstacles and go further. However, how far he could go in such a journey would depend on his own ability. The hope in their hearts could only be regarded as hope. It was not an easy thing to turn it into reality. However, sometimes only with a little bit of hope could one have the motivation to continue. If even that little bit of hope was gone, then this person might be completely abandoned. In the end, if he could not see any hope, he might also give up on himself. This was not something they were willing to see. Moreover, the feelings they had accumulated before this made them place high hopes on him. Li Fengmu's face was full of worry. Although King Zhao had stirred up the Inflame world, they still had no idea what the situation was like in the Wanshou world. Even after such a long time had passed, there was still no news coming back. This made Li Fengmu very uncomfortable. As of now, they were indeed not threatened by the other worlds. However, they still could not let down their guard. Who knew when the war would break out? When that time came, without that person's leadership, how far could they go? This became a problem in Li Fengmu's heart. The God Emperor had been in seclusion for many years. Until now, there was still no news. This was the most torturous part. As long as there was even a little bit of news, they would have some confidence in their hearts and would not have to live in fear every day. Back then, they only wanted to upgrade their world and move to a broader stage. However, who would have thought that they would encounter such a predicament? In fact, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were struggling on the edge of destruction. In fact, the possibility of it being destroyed was very high. It was hard to say when such a situation would occur, and it was extremely torturous. Suddenly, Li Chunyi raised his eyebrows and exclaimed, looking down in disbelief. At the next moment, his eyes were filled with shock and excitement. The reason for that was because he saw a figure rising from the Sword Scar Abyss and soaring into the sky. Li Fengmu also saw it. Even though that person's aura was extremely weak, and even changed due to the ravages of time, Li Fengmu still recognized him at a glance. That was their Sky Sword Realm's most outstanding disciple. He might even be the person with the highest achievement in the Sword Heart Realm. He was Bai Jian. From the very beginning, everyone had high hopes for him. However, because of the changes in the world, he was unable to recover from the setback. Even so, he could still stand up again. He just needed an opportunity. However, he chose the most unlikely one, which was the Sword Scar Abyss. This time he came out, but Li Fengmu couldn't feel happy. He didn't feel any imposing aura. There was only loneliness. Boom! Halfway through, Bai Jian seemed to have exhausted his last bit of strength. He directly collapsed and fell in front of Li Fengmu. At that moment, Bai Jian seemed to have fainted and didn't feel anything. The smile on Li Chunyi's face also froze at this moment. There was no radiance or domineering return as he had expected. Instead, there was only unspeakable sorrow and loneliness. Li Fengmu trembled as he walked over. He helped Bai Jian up, and at the same time, used his divine sense to investigate. He wanted to know what was going on with Bai Jian. However, in the blink of an eye, Li Fengmu's eyes were filled with shock. The old man seemed to have really aged. He sat on the ground dispiritedly and looked at the sky unwillingly. His eyes were filled with regret. "Ancestor, what's wrong with senior brother?" Li Chunyi also sensed that the atmosphere was a little strange and asked hesitantly. Li Fengmu shook his head and said, "The tendons and veins in his body are all broken. I can't even feel the slightest bit of sword qi." As soon as he said that, Li Chunyi immediately collapsed to the ground. Originally, they thought that Bai Jian would definitely return with all the things he had lost. However, who would have thought that it would be like this? His tendons and veins were broken, and there was no sword qi. Just a few simple words were enough to explain a lot of things. It was likely that Bai Jian would become a complete cripple from head to toe in the future. If he didn't even have sword qi, how could he be considered a cultivator of the sword heart realm? The old man and the young man were now in despair. They had been looking forward to the result for a long time, but they didn't expect it to be such an ending. Li Fengmu was almost in despair because he could clearly sense the situation in Bai Jian's body. His body was now like a mess that was difficult to clean up. Moreover, those wounds were all caused by sword qi and some inexplicable auras. Li Fengmu didn't know why, because until now he didn't dare to go down to the sword scar abyss to find out the reason. In the 10,000 beasts realm in the Myriad Mountains, a black-robed man and a white-robed woman walked side by side. They each held an umbrella and looked like they were in an indescribably leisurely mood. They allowed the drizzle to fall, but they moved forward very steadily. Every step seemed to be fixed. Even though there were puddles and mud under their feet, their shoes were spotless. After Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu made arrangements in the southeast, they immediately rushed here. The Myriad Mountains was the place where the Bailing tribe was entrenched. The reason why the Bailing tribe was able to occupy this place was because the terrain here was more rugged. In addition, there were many things to pay attention to, so it was very suitable for them to live in and not for other ferocious beasts. In addition, they lived in seclusion and were even more mysterious. Chapter 2453. After raining for a short while, layers of white smoke began to rise from the ground. It looked beautiful and mesmerizing. The mountain forest was filled with white smoke. This place was like a fairyland, making people subconsciously moved. However, such a beautiful scenery was not something that ordinary people could enjoy. The smoke seemed harmless, but it was actually miasma. Once inhaled, cultivators with lower cultivation would be melted into a pool of blood in a short time. If one's cultivation was slightly higher, although they could resist it with their own strength, it would be difficult for them to endure. Of course, if one was strong enough, they could completely ignore it. Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu's strength was not weak, so this bit of miasma was nothing to them. Even if they accidentally inhaled some, they only needed to circulate their mental cultivation method to dissolve it. However, in such an environment, Princess Mingzhu still felt a little unhappy. This was because she felt that every place in this place was emitting a stench, which made people feel disgusted. If it was not for the fact that she had to come here, she really did not want to come here. However, for the sake of the overall situation, she had to come. Therefore, Princess Mingzhu could only use a breath of clear air to protect herself, which made her feel much better. On the way here, they had already discussed how to deal with the Bewilderment tribe. However, that was only a rough idea. Because the Bewilderment tribe was too mysterious, the information they collected was also very limited. Even if blind left and blind right were to investigate, the information they obtained was very limited. It could even be said that in the Myriad Beast realm, the Bewilderment tribe's thousands of mountains seemed to be a unique existence. It was very isolated. If it was not for the fact that there were some powerhouses from the Bewilderment tribe in the war with the Flame world, Many people would probably think that this tribe was a part of the myriad beast realm that was separated and did not belong to the myriad beast realm. Although the bewilderment tribe did not send out many people, their contributions in the Enflame world could not be underestimated, especially after using poison to kill several powerhouses from the Enflame world. It made people even more fearful. Since the bewilderment tribe could do this to their enemies, then when they became enemies in the future, they would probably end up the same way. Therefore, in this way, no one dared to offend the Confusion Barrier tribe. Even when it came to the allocation of resources, the Meiji tribe had the final say. As long as they made a request, they would usually be granted. Fortunately, this tribe was not that greedy. Every time they made a request, it was very reasonable. It was also because of this that although the Mi-Ku tribe was feared, it was not to the extent of becoming a rat on the street. However, because of their mysteriousness and the use of poison, they had always been disliked. Sometimes, respect was only due to fear, but more often than not, it was fear. Fortunately, the Mi-Jia tribe had a clear rule that they wouldn't go out unless something happened. This way, there would be fewer conflicts between them. Otherwise, the Mi-Ku tribe would easily become the target of public criticism. Occasionally, Princess Mingzhu would see some poisonous insects crawling by, and she would get goosebumps. Even though she had seen a lot of big scenes, she still found it hard to accept these little bugs and poisonous creatures. In fact, that feeling of disgust was even more serious. If it wasn't for the fact that she had to conceal her aura, Princess Mingzhu would have slashed down with her sword and killed all of these little poisonous creatures. Xiao Yong only watched indifferently. He even deliberately inhaled the miasma to temper his poison power. What he cultivated was the power of poison. Furthermore, poison was his lifeline. The reason why he chose to attack here was very simple. He wanted to borrow the Mi-Ku tribe's power to increase his strength. If his strength could be further improved, it would be a huge upgrade for him. If he could control everything well, there might be even more unexpected surprises. However, it was not an easy task to achieve all of this. In fact, it could be said to be extremely difficult. Whether it would succeed or not still depended on luck. You said that you cultivated the power of poison. Princess Mingzhu suddenly asked. Xiao Yang nodded without hiding anything. He had explained this matter clearly on the way here. This was because he felt that as long as he explained the problem clearly, both sides could only cooperate without any grudges. Otherwise, when the time came, if his mentality changed because of some unforeseen events, the consequences might become extremely serious. Therefore, Xiao Yang knew very well which was more important. What is it like? Princess Mingzhu continued to ask. Xiao Yang furrowed his brows slightly. Faced with such a question, it was really difficult for him to answer. Soon after, Xiao Yang extended a hand and a wave of energy rose up. The color of the energy rapidly changed, dazzling everyone who saw it. Seeing this scene, Princess Mingzhu's heart finally calmed down. If Xiao Yang's poison power was extracted by those little bugs, it would be unacceptable. However, Princess Mingzhu did not know that it was like that from the very beginning. It was just that now that he had become more capable, the method of extracting the poison had naturally become more advanced. You don't have to think too much about it. You'll naturally get used to it when you see more of it. Xiao Yang smiled bitterly helplessly. It was difficult for him to persuade people when they were naturally resistant to it. He could only rely on his own heart to soothe it. Princess Mingzhu smiled faintly. She did not want to dwell on the matter. However, she knew very well that she would probably see a completely different Xiao Yang in the coming days. All of a sudden, Princess Mingzhu also felt that the person in front of her was still a mystery. It was as if there were still many secrets about him that no one knew about. If she wanted to understand it clearly, she would probably have to take it step by step to find out just how many methods and secrets he had. Princess Mingzhu sighed inexplicably as she looked at the endless white fog in front of her. She felt that this trip seemed to be quite interesting, although there were too many things that she could not explain clearly. She still felt that something was amiss. All of a sudden, a long bug crawled past, which frightened Princess Mingju so much that she shrieked subconsciously. She raised her sword and slashed it into several pieces. In an instant, a strong smell of blood was mixed in the white mist. Chapter 2454. It was obviously too late to clean up the mess now. When the two of them looked at each other, they had already left the place quickly. After all, the longer they stayed in that place, the higher the possibility of them being discovered. Moreover, they were going to launch a surprise attack, so they naturally needed to hide. A few days later, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingju waited patiently. They caught a poisonous creature at the first-level martial royal realm and killed it silently. Then they searched its soul. As a result, Xiaoyang also received some new information. The Bewilderment tribe was different from the tribes outside, where there was only one type of ferocious beast. The entire Bewilderment tribe was the collective name of countless tribes in the thousands of mountains. Among them, as long as they were poisonous creatures, they could claim to be from the Bewilderment tribe. However, the hierarchy was extremely strict. From this, Xiaoyang also received a piece of information that was very beneficial to him. The 2-rank 5 martial emperor almighty figures came from different tribes, so the places they guarded were different. As a result, he and Princess Mingju could consider defeating them one by one. However, such an approach was obviously somewhat unrealistic. This was because there were also some experts around the 2 almighty figures, so it was not easy to lure them out and kill them. Therefore, how to proceed next became the #1 problem. In addition, most of the cultivators in the Bewilderment tribe did not cultivate a complete human form, so they even retained some characteristics which made it difficult for others to imitate and blend in. Even if Xiaoyang could do it with his poisonous power, it would not be easy to get close to the almighty figure and launch a surprise attack. Therefore, it was almost impossible to launch a sneak attack in the dark. With this thought in mind, Xiaoyang felt a headache coming on. After several discussions, they could not come up with a perfect plan. They could stir up trouble in the dark, like in the southeast, and they could reap the benefits as the fishermen. Xiaoyang took out a ring and said in a low voice, "Take these pills with you. If you accidentally get poisoned, even if they can't cure the poison, they can still suppress it." Although Xiaoyang was not afraid of poison, Princess Mingju was different. She needed the protection of these pills. Princess Mingju did not hesitate and directly took it and put it into her pouch. "Are you really going to attack?" Princess Mingju asked with a frown. She felt that this method was too risky. With Xiaoyang's strength as a third-order martial king, it would be impossible for him to attract the opponent's attention by attacking forcefully. If he was lucky enough to lure the snake out of its hole, how much strength would he be able to preserve by then? So, whether it succeeds or not will depend on your actions. Xiaoyang smiled bitterly and helplessly. Although Xiaoyang felt that he was like a fish in water here, he still needed to rely on Princess Mingju to win. That was because her sword was the most lethal weapon. If he could inflict a heavy blow on his opponent when he was not paying attention, then he would succeed. Of course, Xiaoyang also had his own pride. As the ancestor who played with poison, how could he be afraid of them? Moreover, Xiaoyang's purpose in coming here was very clear. He wanted to use them as supplements to improve his own strength. If he could not do that, how could he go to the central region to fight? Seeing how determined Xiaoyang was, Princess Mingju shook her head helplessly. "Okay, no problem," Princess Mingju said. Since the plan had been formulated, there was no room for hesitation. Sometimes, thinking too much would make a big mistake. Therefore, since it was decided, it had to be carried out. Afterwards, Princess Mingju said a few more words before disappearing into the white mist. She had gone to an excellent hiding place. That location was also something they had discovered during their investigation over the past few days. Whether it was the view or the position of the attack, it was the best place. Of course, the main point was that it was easy to be overlooked. After seeing Princess Mingzhu move, Xiaoyang directly rose from the ground and flew high into the sky. He quickly flew to a valley in the mountains. He looked at the bamboo buildings below, and the smile on his face became much wider. He took off his black robe and sensed the aura below. He had already started to plan. In the call, there were more than 10 martial emperors. Of course, Xiaoyang only paid attention to one person. It was the 5th-level martial emperor almighty. Moreover, Xiaoyang's purpose was very simple. He wanted their lives and strength to increase his own strength. As the black robe was taken off, Xiaoyang no longer hid his aura. His existence was immediately noticed by many powerhouses. Suddenly, some of the powerhouses in the call were even more furious. They did not expect that someone would dare to provoke the Confusion tribe. Which tribe did this little fellow come from? How could he be so ignorant and want to be buried here? Princess Mingzhu, who was hiding in the mountain, also looked over. Xiaoyang stood proudly, like a king looking down on the world. It was as if he had the courage to fight 10,000 men. At that moment, Princess Mingzhu was also very worried. She did not know what would happen if Xiaoyang took the initiative to attack this time. I heard that the Confusion tribe is good at using poison. Today, I'm here to ask for advice. Xiaoyang shouted and said loudly. His words sounded humble, but his tone was very serious and was full of provocation. Now, Xiaoyang's idea was very simple. He wanted to provoke and let everyone come out. Then he would defeat the group of heroes and force the person hiding at the bottom to come out. What he wanted was to lure the snake out of its hole and kill them by surprise. That brat over there is so arrogant. Suddenly, a gloomy voice came out from the valley. Haha, I've recently developed a new kind of poison. I was worried that I didn't have a good test subject. A gloomy voice came one after another. In an instant, many people started to curse. Of course, there were also some almighty who did not care. After all, it was just a guy who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. There was no need to be so calculative. It was enough to let the younger generation play with these little guys. Why should they worry about joining the little guys' battle? It was more practical to think about how to increase their strength. Xiaoyang sneered as he flipped his hand and sent out a palm strike. 1,000 poisonous hands. Chapter 2455. In an instant, the wind and clouds changed. Suddenly, countless green palm prints appeared out of thin air and fell from the sky like a continuous drizzle. The young man stood proudly in the sky, looking down at the world with disdain, as if everything was under his control. The powerhouses here were just SOSO. He could kill them all with a raise of his hand. The drizzle, like palm prints, didn't seem to have much power, but the poison contained in them was extremely terrifying. If an ordinary person was hit by this palm, even if there were no external injuries, he would definitely not feel good. Until now, it had been a long time since Xiaoyang had unleashed the terror of his poison power. Today he was going to use what he was best at to defeat the opponent. He wanted to let the Beige tribe know that their poison was still far inferior to him. Of course, it was more because Xiaoyang wanted to take the poison of these people for his own use. He wanted to quickly break through the current realm, and this was the safest way. Otherwise, with their current situation, it was almost impossible to go to the Zhongzhou to stir up a storm. In fact, it was an impossible task. As long as his strength could be improved a little, then many things would become possible. In this regard, Xiaoyang's mind was also very firm. Presumptuous. Suddenly, with a furious roar, a dark light soared into the sky. Suddenly, a surging force soared from below into the sky. It was incomparably tyrannical. The powerhouse of the Beige tribe couldn't bear it in the end. Of course, as long as it was a normal person, they couldn't tolerate such provocation from outsiders. Since they were already at their doorstep, if they didn't do anything, what was the difference between them and a coward? In an instant, The two forces collided together, and the roaring sound was endless. However, the Almighty Being's methods seemed to be limited because he couldn't take on all the evil schemes. The palm prints that were not blocked continued to fall, bombarding the ground, causing dust to fly everywhere. As for some of the weaker, bewilderment tribe members who were unable to dodge, they directly fell to the ground in unbearable pain. Although they were also proficient in the power of poison, it was still difficult for them to resist when faced with an even stronger poison. It might be ridiculous to say that the beige tribe who was good at poison lost their lives under the poison. The person who rushed out was dark all over, and his eyes were full of evil. Seeing that many tribesmen were in pain, his eyes seemed to be burning with anger. At the same time, the dark-skinned man began to think quickly in his mind. Who exactly was this young man? His attainments in the power of poison were actually so high. However, no matter how he thought about it, the beige tribe was the best at using poison in the myriad beast realm. As for some other tribes, even if there were one or two freaks, their means were very simple. Moreover, although the myriad beast realm was vast, how could the beige tribe's news be blocked? If there was an unparalleled genius of the other tribes, how could they not know? So, who is this young man in front of them? After Xiaoyang saw the dark-skinned man, he frowned and already thought about who this person was. From Bai Xingyun's memory, he knew that this person was called Xie Jun, and he was a 4th-level martial emperor. Although his cultivation was not very high, he was an existence that shone brilliantly on the battlefield of the Yin-Flame world. At that time, he even fought with a 5th-level martial emperor of the Yin-Flame world and used his poison to force him back. He killed many cultivators of the same level, which showed how powerful his methods were. It could be said that Xie Jun's achievements were also outstanding. He also stayed in the Yin-Flame world all year round, seeking benefits for the beige tribe. It was just that he didn't expect this guy to rush back to the myriad beast realm. It wasn't hard to guess the reason for this. Most likely, they had returned for the opportunity in the central region. Once the dust settled, they would most likely join the army and invade the flowing cloud realm. Xiao Yang's eyebrows furrowed once again as he thought about these details. If Xie Jun also joined the battlefield, it would definitely become a very terrifying thing. At that time, there would probably be many people who would lose their lives in his hands. Thinking of this, Xiao Yang took a deep breath, and the killing intent in his heart became much sharper. Since this person was a problem, he had to get rid of him here. Only in this way could he be safe. Although they hadn't started the war yet, when the war broke out in the future, who could imagine how many people would die in his hands? Xie Jun was also observing Xiaoyang, and at the same time his mind was thinking quickly, trying to find some clues to come to a conclusion about who his opponent was. And where did this incomparably arrogant brat come from? However, he couldn't think of a reason, no matter how hard he thought. Could it be that my information is too limited, and a group of very good juniors have emerged in the myriad beast realm during this period of time? Xie Jun thought in his heart, but then he shook his head. He felt that his deduction was somewhat incorrect, and it could even be said that there were many loopholes in it. Jun Xie didn't know what was going on, so he was still pondering in his heart. Ha! Kid, you're only a rank 3 martial emperor, and you dare to provoke me? Xie Jun gritted his teeth and shouted angrily. At this moment, Xie Jun was not careless, because he could already read a lot from the move just now. For example, the power of that move was not something that an ordinary rank 3 martial emperor could produce. Moreover, there was a big difference in their poison power and spiritual power. As long as they used their poison power well, they could even challenge someone of a higher rank. However, the premise was that their power was different. Since they both cultivated the power of poison, the difference in their ranks was enough to crush them. Xiao Yang smiled faintly and said, "With this rank, it's enough to kill you, old poison." When Xie Jun heard this, his expression immediately changed greatly. At the very least, he found it difficult to remain calm. In the face of such arrogant words, he was naturally unhappy. Even so, Jun was more afraid because he didn't think that the young man in front of him was a fool. Since he dared to come to the hinterland of the Confusion Barrier tribe to cause trouble, he must be prepared or have something to rely on. He was not hot-blooded. Chapter 2456. Jun's mind was thinking quickly, and wherever his eyes looked, he accurately explored every clue. He felt that the appearance of this young man was too abrupt. It also gave people the feeling that a storm was about to come. Maybe he was just a hothead who came to pick a fight, and he might have left some tricks behind. Now, Jun was also very curious about which tribe had the guts to come and provoke their Miku tribe. In fact, he even had some unnecessary thoughts. Such an approach was completely because they felt that they didn't have enough troubles. Since this young man had already sent himself to them, then they might as well fight with him. So what if they killed him? Looking at the whole beast realm, it seemed that there was no tribe that could make them afraid. For a long time, only the other tribes in the Wansho realm had avoided the Bewilderment tribe. No matter how many plans or schemes you have to consider clearly whether you have the strength to display all of them. Otherwise, everything he did would just be courting his own death. I'll ask you one more time. Who was it that sent you here? Otherwise, you will be really in danger later. Jun shouted in a deep voice. The Confusion tribe was also very vengeful. As long as someone dared to have thoughts about them, as long as they did it, it was already a capital offense. Moreover, it was the unforgivable kind. If they didn't return the favor tenfold, they wouldn't be reconciled. Seeing that Jun was still asking such a question, Xiaoyang also laughed. Of course, this was also understandable. After all, the beast realm had always been hostile. The open strife and veiled strife between their clans had never stopped. Even though the Confusion tribe was isolated from the world in the thousands of mountains in the west, there were still some people who still feared them. However, there were still many tribes who were afraid of him. They wanted to take action, but they were afraid of getting into big trouble. Therefore, they did not dare to come forward. Fortunately, the Confusion tribe's environment was more suitable for cultivation in the thousands of mountains, so they didn't expand so they could get away from many disputes. However, this didn't mean that no one could be tempted. What can you do if I don't say anything? Xiaoyang said with a slightly disdainful smile. Seeing such a smile, Jun's expression turned extremely ugly. He really couldn't figure out what kind of confidence this young man had to be so arrogant. Moreover, Jun did not find any clues during this period of investigation. Therefore, it could be concluded that this person was supported by someone. However, this was very ridiculous and unrealistic. For such a genius disciple to come out and provoke them, how could there not be any mighty figures following him? Moreover, no matter how one looked at it, it didn't make people think that he was just hot-blooded and came out to train. After all, being able to cultivate to such a level represented a different meaning to his faction. Moreover, he was still so young. In the future, he might even be able to carry the banner. It's fine if you don't want to talk about it. I'll have a way to make you talk later. By then, it'll be your business what kind of pain you'll have to endure. Jun shouted coldly, and his expression became much more serious. Since he was so stubborn now, he could only use poison to make him talk. As for the people of the Confusion tribe, some of them had also died at this moment. Even though the mighty figures in the tribe quickly took action and suppressed the injuries and poison, they found it difficult to do so. They could only watch as their tribesmen were poisoned to death and turned into a pool of blood. For a moment, many of the tribesmen were even more furious because what happened at the moment was a complete humiliation to them. Facing such humiliation, how could they endure it? Naturally, Junxia also noticed the changes below, and his brows furrowed tightly. At the same time, he was also very surprised. What kind of poison did this young man use? It's actually so tyrannical. In the face of such a rising star, Jun also had some praise in his heart. It was a pity that he wasn't from the Confusion tribe, and the talent that he displayed was indeed terrifying. In that case, Xie Jun could only get rid of him as soon as possible. If their Meiji tribe's use of poison was overshadowed by a junior, then what was the point of this? At the very least, Xie Jun found it hard to accept. Xiao Yang also sensed the change in his opponent's power. At the same time, he quickly began to suppress some thoughts in his mind, and the power around him began to circulate. Facing an opponent like Xie Jun, Xiao Yang still needed to be ready for battle. If they were in the same realm, he naturally did not need to look at them in the eye, as he could casually slaughter them. However, in the face of someone with a higher realm, if he still used that mentality to judge the situation and size up the situation, he would probably be digging his own grave. "Let me see what kind of great moves you have, senior." Xiao Yang spoke humbly, but his tone was filled with disdain. The meaning of provocation was even more obvious, as if he completely looked down on Xie Jun and did not put him in his eyes. At this moment, Xie Jun's heart was about to explode. He had never thought that this junior would be so ungrateful, and his words were even more outrageous. "All right, I'll let you see what power is." Xie Jun shouted angrily. As soon as he finished speaking, the aura of a level 4 martial emperor completely erupted at this moment. Even the surrounding white mist seemed to be unable to withstand such pressure, and it kept retreating. Those waves of power even caused some of the bewilderment barrier clan members, whose cultivation bases were slightly lower, to be extremely terrified. This was the power of a powerhouse. Sometimes they only needed to release some of their aura, and it was enough to make people tremble in fear. Some people from the Mi Ku tribe also stood out. They wanted to see how this guy who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth would die. Xiao Yang still had an indifferent look on his face. It was as if he didn't care about this change at all. It was as if no matter how much trouble they made, he was standing right here, and they could not do anything to him. This seemingly blind confidence was completely due to the fact that he had sufficient strength to back himself up. That was why he could be like this. The more Xie Jun watched, the angrier he became. He directly launched an attack. Chapter 2457. Xie Jun roared angrily and struck out with his palm. Instantly, a palm print flew over. Although the palm print looked light, its color was multicolored. In this palm, there was more poison power. This was also the mystery of the Confusion tribe's method. It looked harmless and even made people feel that it was somewhat beautiful. But in fact, it was hidden with killing intent. Before the Confusion tribe's ability was seen through, and before their reputation spread far and wide, there were many almighties who were defeated by such an attack. Xiao Yang stood in the same place without any movement. It was as if he didn't care about this light palm. "How dare you?" Xie Jun saw that the other party didn't do anything, and seemed to be prepared to accept this palm calmly. This made him furious. If those rank 5 almighties ignored his poisonous palm, he would be somewhat happy. After all, the other party's carelessness was to give him a chance. However, this kid, whose cultivation level was lower than his, actually dared to ignore it? To Xie Jun, this was a complete humiliation. Some people from the Confusion tribe were dumbfounded, because they all knew that this poisonous palm seemed simple, but no matter what, it was Xie Jun who struck out. If it wasn't someone of the same cultivation level, they would probably have a headache or even die from the poison after receiving this palm. This kid, on the other hand, ignored it directly. Immediately, Xie Jun suppressed the anger in his heart. "Since you dare to ignore it like this, it won't be too late to slowly torture you when you feel pain later." Sometimes, no matter how high a person's talent was, if he didn't fear anything, then he would be digging his own grave. Moreover, battles were like this. It was enough to be able to win. As for other things, naturally one could be indifferent. There was no need to be overly rigid. Moreover, sometimes, the more you think, the more mistakes you make. Xiao Yang was indifferent to this palm. He even felt a little bored and yawned. It was as if this palm was like a breeze to him. He didn't need to care at all. However, at the same time, Xiao Yang's eyes had already seen through this palm. At the same time, he began to quickly estimate how much poison was mixed in this poisonous palm, and what were the effects of each of them. He analyzed them clearly. When the palm arrived, everyone subconsciously held their breaths. They wanted to see if this young man was truly fearless in the face of danger. He stood there motionless like a mountain, allowing the poisonous palm to hit his body and enter his body. Many people felt that it was a little unreal. They even subconsciously rubbed their eyes, thinking that what they saw might not be real. Some people rubbed their eyes so hard that it hurt. Only then did they realize that they weren't seeing things. Jun was even more shocked in his heart. Just now he thought that this kid was just deliberately mystifying things and would definitely have some kind of backup plan. But now it seemed like he really accepted it calmly. What was going on? Could it be that he wanted to die? He wanted to use his own life in exchange for a reason to start a war with the Confusion Barrier tribe? After thinking of this, Jun couldn't help but gasp subconsciously. At this moment, he felt that the whole thing was not as simple as he thought. However, because of the stagnant information, he couldn't analyze a reasonable explanation at the first moment. After the poison entered his body, Xiaoyang furrowed his brows slightly. He could absorb the poison. As for the force, he could resist it with a breath of will. That was why he could be so unharmed. Xiaoyang sensed the poison and absorbed it at the same time. The reason why Xiaoyang came here was actually to make arrangements for the next thing, because he needed to know what kind of methods the Confusion Barrier tribe had. If he could imitate them, then the incident in the southeast could be repeated in the central region. When the time came, once the few major tribes started a war, perhaps the entire One Beast realm would fall into internal strife because of this. As everyone knew, the Confusion Barrier tribe had always been a very mysterious existence. In addition to the terrain, no one was willing to provoke them. However, what if the people of the Confusion Barrier tribe went out to provoke others? In that case, it was easy to imagine how the situation would turn out. After Princess Mingzhu, who was hiding in the dark, noticed the changes here, she couldn't help but frown slightly. Right now, she really couldn't see through what Xiaoyang was doing. However, she knew very well that Xiaoyang was not a rash person. There must be a reason for some of the things that he did. It was just that, at this moment, Princess Mingzhu really couldn't understand. However, trust made her continue to wait. If Xiaoyang didn't give her a signal, or if there was a crisis that she had no choice but to do so, she wouldn't easily make a move. As the hidden killer move, once she made a move, it would definitely be the key to deciding the outcome. If it was exposed too early, no matter how one looked at it, it wouldn't be a good thing. Sometimes, the longer it was hidden, the more terrifying the effect would be. Jun looked at the young man, and at the same time he began to count in his heart how much time it would take for the poison to take effect. What kind of pain would this young man be in? He would definitely kneel down and beg for mercy. Although the Confusion Barrier tribe didn't have such a shocking method of killing, in terms of torturing people, they were unparalleled in the myriad beasts realm. Since the younger generation was courting death, there was nothing they could do about it. Therefore, what they could do was to satisfy their thoughts and let them know the immensity of heaven and earth. Suddenly, Xiaoyang didn't show any signs of pain. He even burped and didn't seem to have any changes. In a short period of time, Xiaoyang had completely digested the poison and turned it into his own strength. To Xiaoyang, the poison was just like a delicious meal that he could enjoy to his heart's content. As long as it didn't exceed the limit, he could endure it, and it wasn't a big deal. At least with this bit of poison, it wasn't possible to make Xiaoyang collapse. Even though the Confusion Barrier tribe was the existence that was best at using poison in the myriad beasts realm, their methods were far from enough in front of this old ancestor who used poison. I thought you were powerful, but you're only SOSO. With this bit of poison, you want me to kneel down and beg for mercy? Isn't this a joke? Xiaoyang laughed. Chapter 2458. After being hit by the palm, Xiaoyang was still standing there, talking and laughing as if nothing had happened. It was like a breeze that didn't affect him at all. After Xie Jun saw this scene, he was even more shocked. Until now, he was still a little uncertain about the situation now. Therefore, it was inevitable that he felt a little guilty and couldn't figure out the situation. Xie Jun thought that although his poison skill was not the best in the Beigi tribe, once he made a move, most of the powerhouses would still be wary and even fearful. However, the young man in front of him was too indifferent now. It was as if this palm was just scratching an itch for him, and it was useless. After seeing this scene, the other tribesmen were shocked in their hearts, because they also realized that this matter was indeed beyond their understanding. If the opponent was pretending to be calm and pretentious, he still needed some strength and confidence to pretend in such a situation. If he didn't have anything, how could it be like this? They really couldn't understand what kind of monster they were facing now. Or could it be that he was almost completely immune to poison? If this was the case, wasn't it a bit ridiculous? Xie Jun's heart was also more and more uncomfortable and flustered. Although the palm just now was not full strength from the beginning, it was enough to see many problems. If he couldn't even shake his opponent, then even if he used some of his ultimate skills, the effect wouldn't be as good as he expected. Therefore, it was still very difficult to say what kind of variables there were in this. Could it be that this little strength is not enough to fill my stomach? Xiaoyang said with a smile. His words sounded light as a feather, and his disdain was completely revealed. In the face of such a provocation, now Xie Jun really couldn't stay calm. He frowned, and the strong murderous intent surged out again. Although the attack just now didn't work, this didn't mean that you won. Thinking like this, Xie Jun's chest rose and fell slightly. In his sea of consciousness, there were already stormy waves. He was a reputable figure in the entire beast realm, but he was looked down on by an unknown junior. How could he feel comfortable in his heart? Moreover, the attack just now was just the beginning. It was a bit too hasty to say that the battle was over. It was right to be young and frivolous, but if you were too arrogant, then you must pay the price for it. Xiaoyang saw that Xie Jun's mood had been completely affected, and the corner of his mouth showed a trace of a smug smile. I'm afraid that you will stay calm and not dare to make a move. As long as you attack, you will make him proud. With such a precise plan, Xiaoyang was also ready to push this game to a higher place. It was easy to do what you were good at. If it wasn't because the opponent relied too much on poison, it would be more or less difficult to deal with them. Xiaoyang was only afraid that they would not dare to display their abilities, which was why he was at his wit's end. What an arrogant tone! This exalted wants to see exactly how capable you are. Xie Jun coldly shouted. At this point, Xie Jun could no longer calm his emotions. What he was thinking now was very simple, and that was to do his best to make this arrogant kid pay the price. Since you dare to be arrogant, then you must pay an extremely heavy price. Suddenly, Xie Jun flipped his palm, and a strong force gathered at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, the dark green light looked even more terrifying. At this moment, even Xiaoyang couldn't help but frown slightly. This was because he understood the power of this move. It was indeed very terrifying. If it was a cultivator of the same realm, it would be difficult to underestimate this move. If they were careless, they would suffer even more serious consequences after being hit. But so what? Xiaoyang started with poison. The stronger the opponent's poison was, the better news it was for Xiaoyang. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to use his full strength, which would make it difficult for him to enjoy. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyang immediately raised his spirits. After all, he could completely absorb poison, but it was difficult to absorb force. The relationship between the two was still somewhat mysterious and different. Therefore, if he were to blindly take the attacks, the final result would be very embarrassing. Therefore, the safest thing to do was to make sure everything was within the scope of one's control. Sometimes, just a little bit of carelessness could bring about a situation of eternal damnation. Xiaoyang already had a plan in his heart for how to choose. Mysterious poison needle, In the next moment, Jun let out a low roar. His eyes immediately widened as he withdrew his hands. A powerful force continuously attacked at this moment. In the blink of an eye, the dark green light turned into countless poison needles and swarmed towards him. The poison needles could be said to be the height of the sky. At a glance, it looked like an endless drizzle. The poison contained in each of the poison needles was not to be underestimated. If a cultivator below the martial emperor realm did not have any resistance to the poison, he might lose his life immediately. Even if a person was prepared after being hit by a needle, even if he didn't die, he would lose half his life. That was only the power of a single poison needle. What Xiaoyang was facing now was the power of thousands of poison needles. If all of these poison needles hit him, it would be enough to turn him into a hedgehog. Seeing the dark green light approaching, Xiaoyang only frowned slightly. At the same time, he began to plan quickly in his heart. After all, since his opponent had used some of his trump cards, he still had to be prepared. However, in the blink of an eye, Xiaoyang did not move. He continued to stand in the same spot. He even yawned again. It was as if he did not want to look at the poison needles that were full of murderous intent. He was so calm, as if none of this had much to do with him. Or perhaps these powerful poison needles were just a drizzle in his eyes. There was no need to hurry. It was just a drizzle. To a cultivator like him, it was nothing. It would not freeze his body. Chapter 2459. When the crowd saw that Xiaoyang still had a look of disdain on his face, they were shocked. Could it be that this guy was so invincible that he could completely ignore these companies? If that was the case, then it was a little too much. At least, as far as they knew, such a situation had never happened before. Jun had the biggest headache at the moment because he was being looked down upon by his opponent, which made him feel even more uncomfortable. His eyes were fixed on the young man. He wanted to know if the young man could still withstand this attack. It would be fine if the young man could withstand it, but if he could not, then it would be his turn to torture and vent his anger. Countless poisonous needles swarmed over in a moment, and many people subconsciously held their breaths. Some people even began to imagine that the young man who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth would be shot into a hornet's nest, and he would not even have the chance to regret it. Sometimes reality was so terrifying that no matter how one struggled, there would not be any change. Everything seemed to be destined. At least, that was how Xiaoyang saw it. He used his willpower to dispel all the power, then let the poison continuously enter his body. Seeing the poison needles turning into toxins and penetrating the young man's body, Jun's heart became a little nervous because of this. This was because he did not know what the final answer would be, but he was looking forward to it. The poisonous needles continued to pierce into his body, but the final effect was very subtle. This was because after the poisonous needles entered the young man's body, there seemed to be no effect at all. Xiaoyang was still standing there, calmly accepting all of this. It was as if these things did not pose any threat to him at all. In the blink of an eye, countless poisonous needles had pierced into Xiaoyang's body. At this moment, everyone's eyes fell on the young man. They were very curious about what kind of miserable situation the young man would face next. At this moment, Jun didn't dare to act rashly because he wasn't sure what the current situation was. As the saying went, "Know thyself and know thy enemy, and you will never be defeated." However, he did not know anything at this moment, and he was also a little afraid. Therefore, he didn't dare to make a move and was prepared to observe the situation first. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyang's expression began to change subtly. Streaks of dark green appeared on his skin like streaks, making him look very strange. After seeing this scene, Jun's heart calmed down a lot. It seemed that this arrogant brat was not completely immune to the poison. It was only because the dose was not enough that he was able to stand there unharmed. Once that point was crossed, everything would become possible. Many things were like this. Even if you were immune to some things, there was a limit to it. Once that limit is crossed, there is nothing you can do. As long as you were powerful enough, you could beat your opponent to death, even with your fists. Xiao Yang sensed some of the elements within the poison power. Moreover, he analyzed it at an extremely fast speed in his heart. He wanted to know how to use this kind of martial skill so that it wouldn't be abrupt. As some of the poison was absorbed, the dark green stripes that appeared on the surface of his body were also disappearing at an extremely fast speed. At this moment, Xie Jun's heart was almost filled with despair. What kind of situation was this? After seeing this scene, the people from the Bewilderment tribe were even more shocked. This guy is really a monster. How is this possible? Could it be that the poison power has no effect on him at all? This is a complete freak. If that's the case, isn't he the natural enemy of our Bewilderment tribe? Such words continued to spread, and some people's hearts became even more flustered because of this. The thing that the Bewilderment tribe relied on the most to protect themselves was the poison power. However, it was completely ignored by that guy now. How could they accept this? Their greatest trump card was being ignored by the other party. How were they going to continue fighting? It could be said that there was no suspense at all in such a battle. After a moment, Xiao Yang's expression returned to normal again. At this moment, Xie Jun was almost on the verge of breaking down. He never thought that he would still be unable to shake the other party after using such a powerful martial skill. He couldn't even break the other party's defense. Now, Xie Jun almost began to doubt himself. Could it be that he was so useless that he couldn't even handle such a small matter? The more he thought about it, the more painful Xie Jun's heart was. If that's all you have, then you can die by yourself. Although the move just now was a little interesting, in my opinion it's just SOSO, Xiao Yang said with a smile. Xiao Yang naturally knew how powerful that move was. However, the opponent didn't know how powerful this old ancestor who played with poison was to be able to control the situation in his hands. Even if there were some variables, he could also adapt according to the changes. Now, Xie Jun had already begun to doubt himself. He really couldn't figure out what was going on. Or was it that his ability was just SOSO and he couldn't compete with the other party? The more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable Xie Jun felt. Moreover, he felt that things shouldn't be like this. What a powerful kid! At this moment, a deep voice was heard. In the next moment, a man with skin so fair that it seemed sickly stood up and said in a low voice. Xiao Yang raised his head and looked over. He immediately recognized that person. In the Confusion tribe, there was only one person with sickly pale skin, and that person was Xie Lingwan. Xie Lingwan was also a 4th-level martial emperor. Although he had never appeared in a battlefield, there was very little understanding of him. Back then, when Bai Chang was traveling in the Wanshou realm, he had the chance to meet him by chance. That was how he knew about him. Xie Lingwan had always been a mysterious existence. Most of the time he lived in seclusion in the mountains. However, it had always been a mystery as to how powerful he was. However, there was one thing that made people look at him in a different light. Xie Lingwan's skin had turned pale because he had cultivated a rather evil cultivation method. In the end, he had suffered from qi deviation, which was why it was so difficult to go against him. Chapter 2460. Xie Lingmiao stood next to Xie Jun. His eyes kept wandering around Xiao Yang, and he was even sizing him up carefully. Earlier on, Xie Lingmiao had been observing Yangming for a long time, but he could not figure out anything. Now that the situation had evolved to this state, Xie Lingmiao understood that if he was not in the situation, it would be impossible for him to figure out something. It was simply a fool's dream and unrealistic. As for the mysterious young fellow's background, Xie Lingmiao only needed to probe further, and there would naturally be a result. Moreover, Xie Jun was also in a mess because of Yangming's provocation. If Xie Lingmiao did not intervene, his fellow tribesmen's mental state might suffer a huge problem. In fact, it might even become an obstacle for Xie Lingmiao to break through in the future. Xiao Yang was also sizing up Xie Lingmiao. Due to the fact that he knew very little about Xie Lingmiao, He felt rather helpless at the moment. Earlier on, he was able to deal with Xie Jun with ease because he knew some information, which was why he knew how to deal with Xie Lingmiao. On the other hand, how to deal with Xie Lingmiao had become a bigger problem. In fact, Xie Lingmiao was having a headache. Even though the Bewilderment tribe's biggest characteristic was their use of poison, it was inevitable that some of them were outliers. For example, Xie Lingmiao changed his direction because he was possessed by qi deviation during cultivation. It was still a mystery as to what kind of technique he was cultivating and what kind of technique he was good at. Xie Lingmiao studied Yangming for a long time, but he could not figure out anything. He smiled faintly and said, "Young fella, I can tell that you're indeed blessed by heaven in the cultivation of poison technique. Therefore, it is impossible to use poison to subdue you or even kill you." Many people were shocked as soon as Xie Lingmiao said that. If even Xie Lingmiao said that, would it not mean that Yangming was the natural enemy of the Bewilderment tribe? It seemed like it was not without reason that Yangming dared to cause trouble alone. Having said that, the Bewilderment tribe was most adept in poison power, and they were extremely poor in cultivation in other aspects. Therefore, under such circumstances, would it not be even more difficult to take down Yangming? Xie Jun became even more uneasy now. He glanced at his companion and felt extremely helpless in his heart. Who would have thought that such a situation would occur? Xiao Yang let out a bitter laugh, helplessly as his thoughts were exposed. Originally, he had wanted to borrow their strength, but now it seemed that it was a joke. After all, it was hard to talk about such things. But it doesn't matter. So what if you saw it clearly? Their advantages were the same, but Xiao Yang's was greater. No matter how they collided, they still had a huge advantage. Therefore, this was like an open conspiracy. Even if you knew everything, you could only obediently submit in the end and could not resist. I even feel that your actions are very strange. Moreover, you haven't made a move all this while and have been in a state of being beaten up. This must be something you did on purpose. Since you cultivate poison power, I'm afraid our poison power is a good tonic for you. Xie Lingyan smiled. Instantly there was an uproar. So, you want to borrow our poison power to help you cultivate and reach a higher realm. I have to say, your cultivation method is really unique. But in the end, this method is very risky. But the benefits are very considerable. If I don't use my brain, I won't even know that I'm being used by you. Xie Lingyan sneered. At this moment, Xie Jun's expression became extremely ugly. How could he not understand what was going on when the conversation had already reached this point? Connecting all the details one by one, it was indeed the case. In fact, Xie Jun even felt a little ashamed and was too ashamed to show his face. If that was really the case, what he did was no different from helping the enemy. Amazing. I didn't think that you would be able to see through this. Xiao Yang helplessly laughed and said, originally, Xiao Yang wanted to play around a bit more and absorb more of the poison. But now, it seemed that it was already impossible. The fact that the other party could see through the matter so thoroughly showed that he was a powerful figure. Xie Lingyan, who had always been mysterious, only knew what kind of figure he was after coming into contact with him. Moreover, since the other party had exposed everything, Xiao Yang would undoubtedly be courting death if he wanted to continue fighting in the same way as before. Therefore, he would have to make some changes to his next strategy. Moreover, Xie Lingyan would also become his #1 enemy, so he had to kill him first. Only when he was dead would there be less trouble. Otherwise, it would not be good news if they continued to be entangled like this. The more he did, the more things he would see. Therefore, no matter what, he had to end the battle quickly. Only by doing so could he eliminate some variables and not let him be completely passive. Xie Lingyan seemed to have sensed the change in the young man's state of mind and smiled proudly. As expected, everything was no different from what he had expected. However, it wouldn't be an easy task to take him down. If his opponent only had that much ability, how could he dare to come to the myriad mountains alone and cultivate in a provocative way? If he did not have any real ability, he would have been killed on the spot by the other tribes if he was as arrogant as this kid. To be able to reach his current level, he had experienced countless life and death tribulations. He had killed his way up step by step, at least from the analysis of the current situation. It seems that you are indeed a little angry now, and you even want to kill me quickly. The corners of Xie Lingyan's mouth curled up slightly. Since Yi Shiwen had made Xie Jun lose his mind by provoking him, Xie Lingyan would get back at him now. Once a person lost his mind, the things he did would be completely disorderly. And at that time, it would be the time when he would reveal the most flaws. Xiao Yang's face darkened as if beans had been poured out of his mouth. It could be said that he was very uncomfortable. Of course, the more Xie Lingyan said, the stronger Xiao Yang's sense of crisis. Therefore, it was very clear what to do. He could only kill Xie Lingyan first. As for other things, they could be put aside for the time being. Cultivation was important, but in the face of the big picture, making everything move step by step was the most important. Chapter 2461. Xie Lingyao also noticed the anxiety on the young man's face, which made him even more certain. Sure enough, it was similar to what he had expected. In that case, his chances were greater. Since he could see the clues, it would naturally not be a problem to deal with this arrogant young man as long as he dealt with the right medicine. Therefore, as long as he found the right way to fight, many of the following problems would be easily solved. At the very least, it would not be like before, where he did not even realize that he had helped someone else. Xie Jun, fight him with your real body. I'll hold the fort for you, Xie Lingyao continued. When Xie Jun heard this, he no longer hesitated and immediately revealed his real body. Since he had the right way to fight, he naturally had to implement it. If he kept fighting with the wrong plan, he would be the one at a disadvantage in the end. Therefore, he was still relatively clear on how to choose. In an instant, Xie Jun turned into a huge poisonous scorpion. His pair of pincers were even larger than an adult's. Just a glance at the poisonous stinger at his tail was enough to make one tremble in fear. If one was hit by the poisonous stinger, one's body would probably be pierced directly. Moreover, it was highly poisonous. If one was hit by it, the consequences would be unimaginable. After seeing this scene, Xiaoyang couldn't help but take in a breath of cold air. This was because he felt that this was indeed a little difficult to do. No matter how he looked at it, it was still a little difficult for him to fight two people at the same time. Fortunately, the other party was still adept at poison. As long as he could control this well, he would still have a chance. Xiaoyang waved his hand, and the Thunderfire Divine sword immediately appeared in his hand. In the face of such an opponent, he naturally could not be the same as before. Now he had to go all out to fight for a way out. The Thunderfire Divine sword seemed to have sensed the current fighting spirit, so it became a little agitated. Even the sword was trembling. The two completely different forces became much more violent. It was as if it was telling its master to quickly take action and get rid of all of them. Princess Mingzhu, who was watching the battle from afar, also became nervous. She also took out her treasured sword and was ready to attack. If what Xie Lingyao had said was true, then Xiaoyang would indeed be able to deal with everything with ease. But now the situation had changed. Anything could happen, so she had to be prepared as soon as possible. If anything unexpected were to happen, he would be able to provide support at any time. However, judging from Xiaoyang's current attitude, it seemed that he wasn't going to let her take action. Therefore, Princess Mingzhu could only continue to wait. Fortunately, the powerful figures of the Scorpion tribe knew that they wouldn't be of much use if they went up. So, they just watched the battle and didn't interfere. This gave Xiaoyang more space to spend. Otherwise, if they also joined the battle, Xiaoyang's situation would become much worse. Fortunately, everything was still under control, so there was no need to worry too much. Even so, Princess Mingzhu still had to be fully prepared. After all, anything was possible. Princess Mingzhu's gaze never left the battlefield at all. No matter what happened, she could rush to Yangming's rescue as soon as possible. Although Xiao Yang's attention was focused on the gigantic scorpion, his divine sense was also locked onto Xieling Miao. In a way, Xieling Miao was the biggest threat between the two rank 4 powerhouses. Thus, killing him first was the safest thing to do. However, it was not an easy task to achieve this. Next, Xiaoyang didn't wait any longer and slashed with his sword. Since some things had already been seen through, there was no point in continuing to hide them. Therefore, it was better to just go all out and get rid of the biggest threats first. Plunder like fire! Xiaoyang was like a flame as he charged straight at the gigantic scorpion. On the other hand, Xieling Miao narrowed his eyes and moved his hands gently. At the same time, he began to deduce in his mind. This was because he felt that this young man's actions were somewhat abrupt and even somewhat disorderly. Therefore, it was an extremely strange thing. Therefore, there must be a reason behind the abnormality. Nonetheless, Xieling Miao couldn't tell what exactly Yangming was planning. Nonetheless, he could sense that things were far from as simple as he thought. In fact, it might be even more complicated. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was strange. On the other hand, Xie Jun didn't think so much. Instead, a cold glint flashed in his eyes, and he looked like he was ready to kill Xiaoyang. It was as if everything was a foregone conclusion to him. Even though Xieling Miao's biggest reliance was his poison power, he was also a ferocious beast and relied on his own power. As long as Yangming could avoid Xieling Miao's greatest advantage and counterattack, he could still fight Xieling Miao. Even if Xieling Miao had an extraordinary understanding of poison power, so what? There were some things that could never be changed or smoothed out. When Xie Jun sensed that the flaming sword qi was getting closer, he waved his pair of pincers. Without any poison power, the power displayed by Xieling Miao's own power was extraordinary. In fact, the space around him seemed to be on the verge of collapsing under the pincers. The oppressive feeling was extremely heavy. It also felt like even a mountain would be crushed by the pincers, and there would be no way for Xieling Miao to survive. No matter how firm Xiaoyang's heart was, he could still feel the immense pressure. Sure enough, a 4th-rank martial emperor ferocious beast was an existence that could not be underestimated. If he was the slightest bit careless and was hit by it, who knew what kind of terrible consequences there would be? Xiaoyang's frown deepened as he thought about it. Xieling Miao was still sensing the changes in the battlefield. He was not in a hurry to make a move, but he continued to observe. This was because he knew too little about Yangming, so he dared not make a move rashly. Sometimes, if he acted abruptly, he might miss the opportunity. In fact, there might even be more serious consequences. Everything that happened was difficult to describe in a few words. Chapter 2462. Xie Jun was not afraid at all when he saw the tyrannical sword qi coming at him. Instead, he brandished his pincers to attack. The pincers were indestructible like bronze hammers. Every time they were swung, several sword qis were smashed into pieces. It was evident how powerful the pincers were. The black pincers looked extremely sturdy. In fact, they were Scorpion's proudest feature. When fighting against the enemy, that was where their advantage lay. At the same time, Xie Jun had already quietly begun to move his tail needle, which was his greatest killing weapon. If a pair of pincers could trap Xiaoyang, then the stinger would be able to kill him with a single strike. However, Xie Jun was wrong at the next moment. He only saw countless sword qis charging at him, but Xiaoyang suddenly changed his direction and disappeared on the spot. Thunderbolt movement. At the critical moment, Xiaoyang immediately changed the direction of his sword and turned into a thunderbolt. He became extremely violent and charged at Xieling Miao. In other words, Xiaoyang's target had been Xieling Miao since the beginning. As for attacking Xie Jun, it was only a cover-up that made things more conspicuous. Xieling Miao's heart could not help but tremble at this moment. Soon after, the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. He had expected this to happen, but he did not expect the young fellow to be so bold as to make a move. The young fellow's courage and character were indeed very deep. This further confirmed Xie Lingmiao's speculation. The young fellow had always been scheming, and his scheming and shrewdness were extremely terrifying. This was why he was so calm when he attacked, as though nothing had happened. He had come to this conclusion after careful consideration, and it was definitely not a spur-of-the-moment decision. Xie Lingmiao's breathing quickened when he thought about this. This was because he did not know what kind of trump card his opponent would have after the strike. The more he thought about it, the more chaotic Xie Lingmiao became. Because there were too many lines, it was not an easy task to straighten them all out. However, he didn't have much time to think, because the sword had arrived. Break! Xie Lingmei let out a low growl and pushed with both hands. An extremely strong force gushed out continuously. It was like a torrential flood that could not be stopped. Due to the suddenness of the situation, Xie Lingmiao was unable to display any ingenious methods. Therefore, he could only fight with the purest strength to force his opponent back. When this power appeared, the surrounding temperature suddenly became a bit colder. Wherever the power passed, it would be even more severe. Even space itself was trembling. Xiao Yang also sensed the terror of this power, but he did not retreat at all. Instead, he continued to charge forward as fast as he could. If he could accidentally kill Xie Ling with his sword, then the overall situation of this place would be decided. When the time came, he would leave Xie Jun behind and toy with him however he wanted. Therefore, there was no need for him to be anxious at the moment. He only needed to advance step by step. The two forces collided with each other in an instant, and the sound of the roar was endless. The purity of the sword qi and the overbearingness of the thunderbolts. Xiao Yang allowed the powers to continuously hit his body. He continued to charge forward like a man of sacrifice. It was as if he did not feel pain and only cared about moving forward. At that moment, Xie Lingmei panicked a little because he really could not see through the young man in front of him. What exactly was he thinking? How could he be so dauntless as if he was not afraid of death? What exactly was going on? Xie Lingmei could not understand. At the same time, he was in great pain. What was going on? Such a resolute killing intent was a little too terrifying. However, since he had already come this far, there was no way out for him. It was just a battle, so why should he be afraid and be alarmed? However, just as Xie Lingmei was about to let go of his limbs and fight, another accident happened. All of a sudden, the sword qi became extremely overbearing and came with irresistible force. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Yang was already there. Of course, the first to arrive was the sword, the life-taking sword. Xie Lingmei did not dare to hesitate at all and immediately retreated. He knew very well that this was a sword that had been planned for a long time. If he could not avoid it, he was afraid that he would lose his life here. He did not want to welcome such an ending. However, the sword qi had already penetrated his body. Xie Lingmei immediately felt pain in his chest. The pain also made Xie Lingmei more clear-headed. The stronger the opponent, the more he needed to avoid him. If he kept fighting with him, he was afraid that he would be the one at a disadvantage in the end. Xie Lingcui knew which was more important. Therefore, how could he dare to be careless? At the same time, Xie Jun had already rushed over to help. At this moment, Xie Lingmei understood tacitly. He no longer cared about the pain and the path of retreat. He immediately turned around and attacked. He was prepared to form a pincer attack to kill Xiao Yang. You are being attacked from the front and back. Let's see how you are going to defend yourself. However, Xiao Yang continued to attack as if he did not see the attack from behind. It was as if Xie Lingmei was the only person in his eyes. As long as he killed Xie Lingmei, everything else would become logical and effortless. At this moment, Xie Jun was extremely shocked. He did not expect this young man to be so brave. It was as if he had never cared about the condition of his back all this time. Could it be that he really didn't fear death? Qi. The sword that was flickering with fire and lightning pierced Xie Lingmei's chest. At the same time, Xiao Yang's chest was also pierced by a giant black stick. However, upon closer inspection, it wasn't a stick but a huge stinger. It was Xie Lingmei's original tail needle. After Xie Lingmei suffered from qi deviation due to his cultivation, he could no longer use his original form to fight. Therefore, he decided to refine his poisonous stinger into his own magic tool. At this moment, Xie Lingmei's eyes were filled with shock. He had attacked to force Xiao Yang to retreat, but he did not expect this guy to be so crazy. He was really going to trade his life for Xie Lingmei's. It was extremely crazy. Was this guy really not afraid of death? Chapter 2463. Xie Ling looked at the sharp sword in front of his chest, and his eyebrows twitched subconsciously. He still found it hard to accept how things had turned out this way. Even if this young man wasn't afraid of death, he shouldn't have used such a method. At this moment, Xie Jun had already charged over. His pincers smashed down as if he was ready to smash this young man into a pile of minced meat. However, in the next moment, Xiao Yang quickly retreated. He pulled out the Thunderfire Divine Sword and turned around to stab at Xie Jun's eyes. Since he had chosen to pay the price and fight using the method of exchanging injuries, he naturally needed to gain more benefits. Otherwise, wouldn't such a desperate fight turn him into a joke in the end? Everything had been planned out long ago. Furthermore, Xiao Yang had already guessed how many situations would occur. At this moment, although Xiao Yang's movements had become slightly slower, he still managed to dodge Xie Jun's attack. Immediately after, countless sword qi poured down. Even though Xie Jun was a rank 4 Almighty, he couldn't retract his pincers to protect himself. He could only let the sword qi continue to fall. Immediately, Xie Jun cried out in pain. His eyes had been heavily injured by the sword qi. Blood even flowed out from them. After revealing his true form, even though Xie Jun's entire body was covered in a shell that could be said to be indestructible, his eyes were relatively weak and he was completely defenseless. At this moment, the other Almighties saw that the situation wasn't good and they all charged over. If these 2 rank 4 Almighties were killed, it wouldn't be good news for them. All the cultivators above the Martial Emperor realm quickly charged over at this moment. Their current goal was very clear, and that was to save people. Xiao Yang originally wanted to continue to charge forward and take care of a few people first. However, he realized that his movements had become a little sluggish. If he continued to fight, he was afraid that he would be at a disadvantage. As such, he didn't dare to stay for long. He quickly flew up into the sky to shake off these people's pursuit. When the others saw this, they didn't dare to pursue because they knew very well that their goal was to protect their own Almighties so that they could survive. If he continued to chase after them, he might not even be able to keep his life. Therefore, sometimes stopping was a very wise choice. If he continued to pursue after achieving his goal, he would be seeking his own death. Xiao Yang stood high in the sky and looked down coldly. His eyes were filled with coldness and killing intent. He had never thought that Xie Lingmiao's poison needle would be so powerful. Even he felt a little numb, and it was difficult for him to absorb the poison. In the blink of an eye, even Xiao Yang's face began to darken. It wasn't that he couldn't absorb the poison, but it would take some time. At the very least, for now, he would be more or less affected to a certain extent, and it would be difficult for him to extricate himself. What a powerful swordsmanship! You're not from the myriad beasts realm. Xie Lingmei suddenly shouted angrily. Previously, Xie Lingmiao had always thought that this young man was a trap set up by the other tribes. But now, he was certain that this wasn't the case. But no matter how he looked, he couldn't possibly be a cultivator from the Yin Flame realm. Therefore, it was rather difficult for him to understand what kind of person this young man was. He's probably from the Drifting Cloud realm. Xie Jun suddenly thought of something and yelled while enduring the pain. As soon as he said that, the people from the Scorpion tribe were shocked. They were originally discussing who would go on a punitive expedition against the Four Realms Alliance, but they didn't expect the other party to come so quickly. Xie Lingmei's face turned even uglier at this moment. If that was the case, everything made sense. However, they didn't expect that the other party would take the initiative to attack instead of waiting for death. He even killed his way to the Bewilderment tribe. The sword qi in his body was still rampaging, destroying his remaining vitality. This made Xie Lingmei feel even more miserable. However, he didn't dare to continue suppressing his injuries wholeheartedly because he didn't know when the young man would attack again. If he didn't take any precautions, who knew what would happen next? Xiao Yang kept taking deep breaths and used his poison to suppress the other party's poison. His current goal was relatively clear. As long as he was still able to move, he would kill a few people first. Moreover, now that his identity had been exposed, if this matter were to spread, it would be detrimental to his future operations. After suppressing the numbness, Xiao Yang attacked again. He slashed out with his sword, thunder and fire plunder. Immediately, the thunder and flames turned into sword qi and formed a sword barrier around Xiao Yang's body. Then he charged down again. This time, Xiao Yang's goal was very clear. He wanted to kill the severely injured Xie Lingmei. When he saw Xiao Yang charging at him without any regard for his life, Xie Lingsui was even more shocked. He couldn't imagine that this guy was really reckless. In the blink of an eye, a third-level martial emperor almighty revealed his true form and prepared to block Xiao Yang's attack. Although they were at the same level, the ability that Xiao Yang had displayed made it clear that he was no match for him. However, the arrow was knocked on the bow and had to be released. Therefore, even if he couldn't block it, he had to. Otherwise, if Xie Lingmei was killed, they would lack a fourth-level almighty. Moreover, this fourth-level almighty had the heaviest burden on his shoulders. It could even be said that Xie Lingmei was their tribe's second-in-command. If he lost his life, who else in the tribe would be able to lead? The third-level almighty seemed to have completely underestimated Xiao Yang's ability. In the blink of an eye, when the sword qi arrived, cracks began to appear on his shell. Under such a powerful sword aura, it was already difficult for him to block it. Coupled with the tyrannical thunder and the destructive flames, it was impossible for his shell to withstand the attack of these two types of sword qi. Xie Lingmei wanted to run, but the situation in his body was terrible. It didn't allow him to make any more movements. It seemed that he could only wait for death on the spot. There was no other way. Xie Lingmei was unwilling to give up. He stumbled and fled. Even though he looked like he was in a sorry state, he just wanted to continue living. However, in the next moment, the third-level almighty had already fallen. The remaining power of the sword qi poured down and pierced his body, destroying his life force. Chapter 2464. Xie Lingmiao looked at the hole in his chest and frowned even more. He could feel his vitality slipping away. A sense of helplessness welled up in his heart. He had been plotting before making a move and was even looking for the best opportunity to counterattack. However, he had never expected that the situation he was facing would be so terrible. In front of his opponent, he was completely powerless to fight back. How was this possible? He felt that everything was unreal. Everything had just begun, but his life had already come to an end. This made him feel even more bitter. Even now, Xie Lingmiao still found it hard to come back to his senses. His opponent was only a third-level martial emperor, and there was still a gap between their realms. How could he be so decisive and even take his life? The more Xie Lingmiao thought about it, the more upset he felt. He could not accept such an outcome, and there was a lot of unwillingness in his heart. However, everything was over. Given the current situation, it could be said that there was no way to reverse the situation. His vitality had been completely cut off, and it would be difficult to return to life without some heaven-defying treasure. However, as far as he knew, there was no such thing in the Confusion Barrier tribe. Even if there was, why would they use it on him? Xie Lingmiao had suffered a great loss of vitality because of his cultivation in the early days. Although he had cultivated to his current realm, it was entirely because others respected him that he had such a status. However, all of this was like a fleeting cloud that was constantly dissipating. At this moment, Xie Miao felt his eyelids become very heavy. That gloomy feeling continued to surge into his heart. Perhaps he had thought of everything too simply. That was why he had come to such an end. A few more wounds appeared on Xiao Yang's back because the others had taken advantage of this opportunity to launch an attack. Because he wanted to kill Xie Miao, he could not care less about the attacks on his back. Fortunately, his physique was strong enough, so he was able to withstand them in such a state. When he turned around, the cultivators of the Scorpion tribe could not help but tremble and take a few steps back when they saw his gaze. Even Xie Miao could not survive Xiao Yang's attack, let alone them. Previously, it was because of some opportunities that they were able to successfully launch a sneak attack. Moreover, from the looks of it, the previous sneak attack did not seem to have much effect. It could even be said that Xiao Yang did not even frown. It was as if he had completely disregarded him and appeared to be very indifferent. At this moment, the many people from the poisoned Scorpion tribe had no choice but to become alert. At the same time, some people were even more terrified. This was because they knew very well that if this Almighty wanted to attack them, they would have no reason to live either. Some people even felt suffocated. The situation could be said to have taken a turn for the worse. On the other hand, the strength and domineering aura that this young man from the flowing cloud world displayed was even more frightening. Originally, many people were ridiculing the White Bear tribe for being incompetent. They had dispatched so many powerful beings, but they couldn't even take down a newly ascended small world. That was simply a joke. But now, they knew that this was not the case. The reason for that was because the strength displayed by that man was simply too powerful. Even their Confusion Barrier tribe found it difficult to contend against him. Xie Jun continued to roar in anger. The loss of his sight caused him to feel even more pain in his heart. The development of the situation was even more out of his expectations. It could be said that all of this had happened too quickly, catching everyone off guard. Even though Xie Jun had endless strength and ability, it did not seem to have much effect on the other party. It was as if he had strength but could not use it and could only be anxious. This aggrieved feeling almost made him go berserk. However, even if he went berserk, it would be useless because it could not change the current situation. Everything seemed to be destined. Absolute suppression made it so that no matter how great his ability was, he could not use it. Xiao Yang looked down coldly, and at the same time his gaze fell on a cave. In his opinion, these guys were just an appetizer. The main person to deal with was the Almighty hiding in the dark. Although the Almighty was most likely in seclusion to break through to the next realm, he still had to be on guard. It could even be said that from the beginning, Xiao Yang's goal was very clear. That was to kill the rank 5 powerhouses of each tribe and use this result to stir up a storm in this side of the world. He wanted to cause chaos from the inside so that he could avoid a lot of trouble. "I'm going to kill you." Xie Jun roared angrily again. At the same time, Xie Jun began to use his aura to lock onto his opponent. As he was already blind, he could not see anything and could only rely on his aura to lock onto his opponent. Xiao Yang did not respond and only sneered. At the same time, his expression became much more serious. This was because what he felt was a powerful aura that was crazily rising. Obviously, that powerhouse had already noticed a change here, so he was ready to make a move. Xiao Yang waved the divine sword in his hand, and immediately his spirit was shaken again. Next, that was the ultimate goal of this trip. As for whether he could achieve it or not, it would depend on how he reacted. After all, there was a difference of 2 realms. Even if he had an innate advantage, it was still difficult to ignore the other disadvantages. Therefore, the following battle was very unfavorable for Xiao Yang. Even so, he could only bite the bullet. After all, since he had made a decision, he naturally had to complete it. If he did not complete it, there would be a lot of hidden dangers for the next part of his plan. What an arrogant brat! How dare you behave so atrociously in my territory? Suddenly, an extremely domineering roar was heard. Such a majestic and domineering voice could only be naturally cultivated after sitting in a high position for a long time. It was not something that could be cultivated in a short period of time. At this moment, the pressure in Xiao Yang's heart increased tremendously. This was because he felt that the aura had completely locked onto him. Xie Jianqing, huh? Xiao Yang muttered, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly at the same time. In the next moment, he saw an old man in green clothes step out of a cave. With just one step, he was next to Xie Jun. Chapter 2465. Xie Jianqing glanced at Xie Jun from the corner of his eyes. His brows furrowed tightly, and he looked like he was in great pain. Xie Jun was Xie Jianqing's grandson, and he was Xie Jianqing's favorite junior. How could Xie Jianqing not feel anything when Xie Jun ended up in such a state? However, he could only watch on helplessly. The Confucian tribe had always stood aloof from worldly affairs, and they were very restrained every time they made a move. Who would have thought that there would actually be someone who dared to take the initiative to provoke them today? Wasn't this underestimating them a little too much? When Xie Jianqing saw that Xie Lingmiao had fallen to the ground and was no longer breathing, his heart ached again. He did not expect that one of the two juniors in the Scorpion tribe would be dead and injured. If he had appeared a little later, he might have died here. Xie Jianqing looked terrible because he was cultivating in seclusion to prepare for the fight for the opportunity in the central region. However, due to the changes in the tribe, he had no choice but to appear and forcefully break out of seclusion. This caused his breathing to be unstable, and he even suffered a backlash. Xie Jianqing was even more upset to be faced with such a situation as soon as he came out. Moreover, Xie Jun's cultivation was only at level 3 Martial Emperor, which was 1 level lower than them. He did not expect them to lose. What was going on here? The more Xie Jianqing thought about it, the angrier he became. He found it hard to accept. Or could it be that this person was a freak? Xie Jun became even more deranged after sensing that his elder had come out of seclusion. Perhaps it was because he had someone backing him up that he had the confidence to do so. "Grandpa, kill him!" Xie Jun roared hysterically. However, even though Xiaoyang was heavily surrounded, he still had a carefree look on his face. It was as if the injuries he had suffered before had completely disappeared. The injuries were still there, but they were temporarily suppressed. Under such circumstances, no matter how uncomfortable he was, he could only grit his teeth and persevere. Otherwise, he would not have a good ending. This kind of aura was definitely not weak. Even if Xie Jianqing was a Type 5 Divine Warrior, with Xiaoyang's current strength, it would still be a stretch to contend with him. However, it wasn't as if he didn't have any confidence. His opponent's area of expertise was still poison. As long as he could control it well, he would still have a chance to win. After all, the thing that the other party was best at couldn't do anything to him. This was where his advantage lay. As long as everything was under control, it would not be a problem. Although he said that, Xiaoyang was still a little nervous in his heart. Even though he had arranged for Princess Mingzhu to launch a sneak attack in the dark, it seemed like it would still be a little difficult for her to succeed. There were many problems here, and it was difficult to completely understand them all in a short period of time. Xie Jianqing looked at the arrogant brat, and the anger in his heart was about to shoot up to the sky. It had been a long time since he had seen a junior act like this. It was possible that the other party was like a newborn calf that was not afraid of a tiger. However, that kid's strength was indeed thought-provoking. To be able to kill one of the two cultivators who were at a higher level than him was enough to show how strong he was. "Brat, tell me your name. Which family are you from? How dare you offend our Bailey tribe?" Xie Jianqing shouted angrily. Xiaoyang still didn't answer. He held the sword hilt and looked like he was ready to attack. One could even see that there was a sneer at the corner of his mouth. Such an expression could be said to be extremely provocative. It was also as if he didn't realize how terrible the situation was, which was why he could be so calm. Xie Jianqing's heart kept heaving up and down when he saw this. How could he feel being looked down upon by a junior like this? However, he didn't know the background of this guy, so he didn't dare to act rashly now. After all, the power behind such a genius would be extraordinary. At that time, once the other party got angry, what kind of blow would their Jie tribe have to bear? Grandfather, he's from the drifting cloud boundary. He seems to be immune to our poison. Xie Jun became much calmer at this time and said. Xie Jianqing raised his eyebrows again when he heard this. This was a little unexpected. He had only heard of the drifting cloud boundary some time ago. He didn't expect that he would dare to invade their Wanshou boundary when he just advanced from a small world, and even chose their Bailey tribe as his target. Hearing the latter words, Xie Jianqing could also understand that since the other party chose to come here, it was probably because he had such a reliance. Otherwise, how could he easily take the risk? Good boy, so you have the confidence. Xie Jianqing sneered. Xiao Yang still ignored him and continued to play the game in his heart. At the same time, he was also sensing the other party's aura, trying to judge the other party's strength. Deductions after deductions were made so that he could maintain the initiative in the subsequent battles, allowing him to anticipate all the possible situations that might happen and even be able to withstand them. I don't believe that you're completely immune to poison. Everything has a limit. I'd like to see if you can defend against my poison. Xie Jianqing shouted angrily. Xiao Yang nodded with a smile at this time and said, Try it and you'll know. These words were still full of provocation. As soon as these words came out, the people of the Scorpion tribe were even more shocked. Even their strongest person had come out, but this guy could still continue to maintain his previous attitude. Wasn't this a little too arrogant? Could it be that he really had a great reliance to be so arrogant? Xie Jianqing's expression changed again at this moment. He didn't expect that this guy could continue to be so arrogant. This attitude of not putting him in his eyes was incomparably disgusting. However, Xie Jianqing had to think carefully about the limit of the other party's immunity to poison. Otherwise, if there was a mistake, the consequences would be terrible. At the same time, Xie Jianqing's mind was quickly calculating how he should face the battle, facing a cultivator who was 2 realms lower than him, as a formidable person in the Wanshou boundary. He had to treat a junior seriously. Chapter 2466. Even Xie Jianqing himself felt that this was somewhat unreal. In fact, he even felt that it was a little strange. However, based on the outcome of the battle, he had no choice but to maintain such an attitude. After all, based on the current situation, the other party was a natural counter to them, which was why he dared to come here. Those who could reach the martial emperor realm were not fools. No matter how arrogant a person was, he or she would have considered many things clearly. If he or she did not have anything to rely on, doing such a risky thing was no different from courting death. As Xie Jianqing waved his sleeves, he gathered his aura completely. There was an extremely strong, murderous intent in between his eyebrows. He had to kill such a freak as soon as possible. Otherwise, as the other party continued to grow, he would become a huge obstacle to the entire Bailing tribe. The reason why the Bailing tribe could be domineering in the beast realm and make everyone respect them was because of their poison power. It was an extremely strange poison that made their opponents fearful. However, there was someone who could restrain their ability, so they naturally had to kill the other party here. Only by doing so could the Bailing tribe maintain their previous status. Xiao Yang also felt the battle intent. The other party could attack at any time, so he had to be on guard. However, he still had a plan to take such precautions. Boy, are you still putting on an act? You still don't know that you're about to die? Xie Jianqing shouted angrily. In an instant, with Xie Jianqing as the center, it could be said that a storm was brewing. The aura that belonged to an overlord was completely exposed at this moment. Even Xie Jun, who was standing beside him, felt an immense pressure. Furthermore, this sort of oppressive might was unleashed unintentionally. Furthermore, the person it was targeting was Xiaoyang. The other tribesmen were also watching attentively. They wanted to see what would happen to the arrogant guy in the end. It was time for him to die. If you really have the confidence to kill me, why would you talk to me so much? You just want to provoke me with words? Or you want to get something out of me? However, what's the use of this? Xiaoyang laughed heartily. As soon as these words were spoken, the expressions of everyone present changed. Even Xie Jianqing was somewhat deflated. After his thoughts were exposed, he felt even more humiliated and angry. This also made the old man realize that this young man only looked young. His thoughts could be said to be extremely profound. He was able to see through many things very clearly. In the face of such a cunning little fox, it was not an easy task to take her down. However, from these words, Xie Jianqing also analyzed a lot of things. That would mean that this little guy was not simple at all. He was extremely shrewd. No matter how one looked at it, it was not easy to deal with. Even though there was a gap in their cultivation levels, the other party would use other methods to close the gap. So what if you are immune to poison? I don't need to use poison. Just my strength alone is enough to crush you. Xie Jianqing frowned and said angrily, although the Meiji tribe was best at poison, in terms of cultivation, they were not bad either. However, compared to poison, it was slightly weaker. Xiaoyang was still expressionless, as if the other party's words were like farts. Xiaoyang was also clear about this, which was also what he was afraid of. However, he could not show it and had to pretend to be calm. Moreover, he had to manipulate this situation to a greater extent. Unless it was a last resort, or when the time was completely ripe, he could not let Princess Mingzhu take action to kill. However, it was not an easy task to kill a 5th-level martial emperor expert. Why aren't you talking? Xie Jianqing sneered. From the other party's reaction, Xie Jianqing gradually figured out some things. He had lived for so many years, so he naturally knew how to find out the truth of a matter. After cultivating for so many years, Xie Jianqing's maturity was still very profound. I just feel that it's boring. Why don't you give it a try? Xiaoyang sneered. Even if you see through it, so what? As long as he kept up the same attitude and made you unable to figure out what was going on, you would still be afraid. As expected, Xie Jianqing's heart was indeed filled with doubts. However, his thoughts did not change. On the contrary, Xie Jun was getting impatient. He really did not understand what his elder was nagging about. The difference of 2 levels was enough to crush him. So why waste his breath? Xie Jun's impatience made him look ferocious. However, as he could not attack anymore, he could only be anxious and could not do anything. In the next moment, Xie Jianqing did not seem to want to continue nagging, and his hands moved quickly. He had already obtained all the information that could be obtained through words. Even if he continued to talk, it would not be of much use. Therefore, he could only fight to find out the details and confidence of his opponent. As Xie Jianqing's hands moved, the white fog that had been dispersed by the shock quickly gathered towards his hands. It wasn't just the poisonous white fog that was converging, but also the power of heaven and earth in this area. Anyone who had cultivated to the martial emperor realm could manipulate the power of heaven and earth with a raise of their hands. The only difference was the strength. However, Xie Jianqing's move had manipulated a very strong power of heaven and earth. At this moment, Xiaoyang also felt the threat and pressure of the martial emperor realm. Interesting, I didn't expect this old man to be so compatible with this world. Xiaoyang muttered in his heart, and the pressure increased at the same time. The power of heaven and earth was not to be underestimated, and Xiaoyang could not completely ignore it. Therefore, Xiaoyang swung his sword. Instantly, countless amounts of sword qi appeared around him and turned into a sword barrier that protected him. At the same time, he quickly gathered his will and raised his defense to the extreme. How could Xiao Yang dare to underestimate the difference of two levels, and it was a one-on-one fight? In fact, he would need to use all his skills to be able to fight him. Otherwise, if he made a mistake, he might lose his life and be consigned to eternal damnation. Searching for flowers in the fog. Chapter 2467. Xie Jianqing pushed out with both hands, and instantly, countless white fog gushed out. It was as if layers of clouds were tumbling, and it was unstoppable. The white fog was rolling at a very fast speed. It looked harmless, just like the fog in winter. It was very normal. However, Xiao Yang, who was facing the white mists, furrowed his eyebrows, because up until now, he still hadn't sensed the slightest bit of killing intent. However, he knew very well that it was just an illusion, and there was probably a hidden killing intent. If he was careless, he might be hit. In particular, the more harmless the move looked, the more terrifying it was. This was because the soft feeling made it easy for one to belittle it. Once one had such a thought, one would be in trouble. The weaker the move, the stronger the aftereffects. Xie Jianqing watched with rapt attention. He wanted to see how capable the young man was, and if he was really immune to the poison. If that was really the case, then the following attacks would have to be changed because of this. Otherwise, no matter how ingenious one's methods were, the final result would be terrible. It was like using one's greatest ability to cause the smallest effect on one's enemy. Xiao Yang was ready for battle. After the white mists passed through the sword defense, rumbling sounds were heard. It was obvious that it was caused by the collision of powers. When the white mists completely engulfed him, Xiao Yang sensed that the power contained in them was extremely terrifying. If it wasn't for the layer of sword defense protecting him, the power would have exploded on his body. The most terrifying thing about this move was the poison hidden in the white mists. The poison was colorless and odorless, and it was still silently entering Xiao Yang's body through the breath of will. Sensing the continuous invasion of the poison, Xiao Yang's lips curled up. It seemed that although his opponent had figured out something, he was still afraid. Regarding this, Xiao Yang also felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He originally thought that after his advantage was seen through, his opponent would probably change the way of fighting and make it difficult for him to achieve his goal. However, curiosity killed the cat. Even now, Xie Jianqing still wanted to try. In this way, some things could still be carried out. After the poison invaded his body, Xiao Yang absorbed it immediately to increase his strength. The ability of a 5th-level martial emperor was not to be underestimated. If it was not for Xiao Yang's heaven-defying cultivation technique, it would be almost impossible for him to block it. Princess Mingzhu, who was watching the battle from afar, was even more anxious because she could not see what was going on inside. Although she could use her divine consciousness to sense everything and know what was going on, she did not dare to do so. This was because once she released her divine consciousness, she was afraid that it would be discovered by others. At that time, the backup plan he had left behind would probably turn into a fleeting cloud and become completely useless. However, the wait was very torturous. Because she didn't know what was going on, she was even more speechless. No matter how much she trusted Xiao Yang, she could not help but worry when she was in such an ignorant situation. Xie Jianqing was still observing quietly. Although others could not see what was going on inside the white fog, he could sense it clearly. The layers of sword defense had begun to shatter, and there was a lot of poison that had invaded the young man's body. As for how much immunity Xiao Yang had against the poison, using this move would be enough to find out the extent of his immunity. On the contrary, Xie Jun was very excited because he wanted to know the result. He wanted to know what would happen to the guy who destroyed his eyes. Xie Jun had even made a calculation in his heart. After his elders took down the kid, he would torture him well and let him know what it meant to beg for death. If a person made a wrong decision, he would have to pay the price. No matter how capable he was, he would have to pay the price. In the blink of an eye, the layers of sword defense shattered under the bombardment of those forces. Countless forces continued to strike Xiao Yang's body. He seemed to be unable to withstand the attacks and was forced to retreat continuously. The white fog seemed to have formed a tornado and rushed into his body. At a glance, it was a spectacular sight. In the blink of an eye, the poisonous fog had all rushed into his body. Xiao Yang stood where he was, but his entire body was trembling nonstop. Every part of his skin that could be seen had a strange color appearing. When Xie Jianqing saw this, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Previously, he thought that the young man was completely immune to the poison, but now it seemed that there was only a limit. If it could not exceed that limit, it might be useless. In this world, there was no such thing as complete immunity. Everything depended on the dose. It seems that your talent is only SOSO. If you're really immune to my poison, then it'll be a real headache for me. Now your time of death has come. Xie Jianqing sneered. Now, Xie Jianqing had completely regained his composure. Previously, he was indeed worried about Xiao Yang's immunity to the poison, so he was so restrained. But now that he had probed everything clearly, he knew what was going on in his heart. Xiao Yang seemed to have become a little slow, as if he could not hear what the opponent said clearly, so he did not respond. But after a while, the young man suddenly spat out a mouthful of black blood, and his eyes burned with fighting spirit again. Ha! You're just an arrow at the end of its flight, and you still dare to be fierce? Next, I'll let you have a taste of my means. Xie Jianqing suddenly shouted angrily. As soon as he said that, Xiao Yang's expression changed again. That trace of fear flashed in the blink of an eye. It was as if he was preparing to hide something, or as if he was afraid of something. These small changes made Xie Jianqing's heart extremely excited, because he knew that it was time to end this farce. The victory or defeat of this battle was already in this move. His hand stirred again, and the surrounding power of heaven and earth quickly gathered. The power gathered more and more, and it was very terrifying. Xie Jun, who was standing at the side, found it difficult to bear, and even subconsciously took a few steps back. Obviously, he was afraid. Black Poison Sting. Chapter 2468. After Xie Jianqing saw everything clearly, the murderous intent in his heart surged even more. Of course, killing Xiao Yang was not his goal, but he wanted to see where his tolerance limit was. He even wanted to use him for research. Since this guy was immune to a lot of poison, it meant that he had some secrets. If he could unearth them and use them for himself, there might be a new breakthrough. Thinking of this, Xie Jianqing's heart became even more impatient. He felt that many things were possible. In fact, this was the opportunity for him to break through, so he couldn't miss this great opportunity. In the blink of an eye, a black-looking poisonous stinger was completed. In the next moment, Xie Jianqing threw it out. Although Xiao Yang had regained his senses, it seemed that his body was completely paralyzed. Even if he wanted to move, it was almost impossible. It was as if he had become a fish on the chopping board, and he could only be slaughtered. He could not even move an inch. The situation became extremely tense at this moment. Many people wanted to know what the final outcome would be. In fact, they began to look forward to it. The incomparably arrogant boy was unable to move under the pressure of the ancestor. At this moment, he could only wait for death to come. No matter how amazing you are only a third-level martial emperor. Compared to a fifth-level powerhouse, there was still a world of difference. It was almost impossible to bridge the gap. Sometimes, when a person was too confident in his ability to the point of arrogance, he would have to pay the price. It would not be strange at all if he lost his life. Everyone had been young and frivolous, but sometimes, once a mistake was made, it would be an eternal regret. Xiao Yang stared blankly at the incoming poisonous stinger. He knew how terrifying the stinger was, but he still did not dodge it as if he was an idiot. The poison gathered in his body, causing his veins to become stagnant. Even his divine sense became a little blurry because of it. Sometimes, even if you could see everything clearly, it would still be difficult for you to respond. Sometimes, the power of poison was so terrifying that it could make you lose your ability to resist. Even if you didn't suffer any serious injuries, it was enough to greatly affect you. The Scorpion tribe's cultivators were overjoyed to see this. His previous worries could finally come to an end. The old ancestor was indeed the old ancestor. He had the ability to make the final decision. If it weren't for him, their Scorpion tribe would have suffered an incomparably heavy blow today. They might even lose their supreme status in the Jia tribe. Fortunately, the old ancestor came out of seclusion in time and turned the tide, restraining this young man. Although Xie Jianqing appeared to be very indifferent now, he was also looking forward to what kind of benefits his move would bring. Because until now he could only understand a lot of things from the surface. But it was hard to say whether it was real or not. Everything was progressing too quickly. It was too different from what he had shown before. Therefore, Xie Jianqing was a little uncertain in his heart. He didn't know if his opponent was pretending to be weak or something else. As for whether it was real or not, everything would be clear after he used his ultimate skill. In the blink of an eye, the poisonous sting directly pierced Xiao Yang's chest and continued to enter. Xiao Yang's face had also become distorted due to the poison that had entered his body, and the pain he was feeling was even more vivid than before. It was as if he was almost going to die from the pain. After the poisonous sting entered his body, it turned into countless powers of poison, which kept swimming in Xiao Yang's body and began to destroy his vitality and numb his senses. Xiao Yang still did not move, as if he was trapped there. It was impossible for him to move even if he wanted to. As far as the eye could see, black qi began to appear. Xie Jianqing secretly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this. This was because everything was exactly the same as what was shown after this move. In other words, this young man's limit had been exceeded, and the power of the poison was difficult to resist. Kid, it's time for you to pay the price for your confidence. Xie Jianqing thought in his heart and smiled a little more. However, his smile suddenly stopped because he thought about how his family's losses were also not small. He couldn't help but feel a little worried. A level 3 Martial Emperor boy had caused them to lose a level 4 Martial Emperor cultivator, and one of them had even lost his eyes. Thinking of this, Xie Jianqing was so angry that his teeth itched. It seemed that even if he cut him into pieces, it would not be enough to vent his anger. So what if he killed him? Xie Lingmiao was already dead, so it was impossible for him to come back to life. Suddenly, a glimmer of light flashed in Xie Jianqing's eyes. This was because he thought of another possibility, which was to let Xie Lingmiao possess his body. That boy was immune to the power of poison, so he must have some unique advantages. If he was able to take over his body, he might be able to achieve an extraordinary effect. Although Xie Lingmiao's physical body had been destroyed, his spirit was still there. If he could restrain it in time, there was still a possibility. After thinking about this, Xie Jianqing's hands began to form a seal. He was prepared to gather Xie Lingmiao's spirit and use it to fight for a chance of survival. Although there would inevitably be some troublesome matters when the time came, as long as time passed, Xie Lingmiao might be able to return to his original state. He would still be the god's favored child and not a sickly person who could only stay at home because of qigong deviation. Xie Jianqing didn't have any more thoughts about Xiao Yang's current situation. This was because he knew very well that after being hit by his black poison spike, he would only be tortured to death by the power of the poison. Moreover, the process was very painful, and the person's spirit would be tortured until his spirit dissipated. Everything was extremely possible. The only thing Xie Jianqing could do was try his best to recover his losses. Perhaps under these special effects, there would be many unexpected surprises. Soon, Xie Jianqing locked onto Xie Lingmiao's spirit. After realizing that there was still a chance, he was very happy. He didn't know how this gamble would turn out, but it was worth a try. Green Sky Sword Rain. Chapter 2469. Princess Mingzhu watched as the poisonous thorn entered Xiao Yang's body, but she remained indifferent. This was because she had received a message from ripples in her heart lake, telling her to prepare to kill Xie Jianqing. It was a message from Xiaoyang. Since he was not asking for help, he was going to kill Xie Jianqing. This was enough to show that Xiaoyang was confident that he could handle it. Therefore, even though Princess Mingzhu wanted to help, she did not. Instead, she drew her sword and began to prepare her killing move. It could be said that from the moment Xie Jianqing appeared, Princess Mingzhu had been preparing her killing move. However, she had been waiting for an opportunity and Xiaoyang's signal. She did not expect that the signal would come so slowly. Although she did not know what was going on with Xiaoyang, she did not know whether he was dead or alive. However, what she needed to do could not be delayed at all. Therefore, after she finished gathering her sword momentum, she immediately charged out and swung her sword. All of a sudden, countless streams of sword qi rained down like rain. Each streak of sword qi contained a terrifying sword intent. Even cultivators below the martial emperor realm would find it difficult to survive such a sword intent. The power of a 4th-level martial emperor's attack was extremely terrifying. At the same time, a huge golden sword qi fell again and went straight for Xie Jianqing. When Xie Jianqing sensed the sword intent, he began to be vigilant. However, all his attention was on how to restrain Xie Lingxuan's spirit, so it was inevitable that he was caught off guard. It was difficult for him to guard against the attack at such an opportune moment. In an instant, Xie Jianqing spat out a mouthful of blood and revealed his true form. He was a gigantic poisonous scorpion. His entire body was covered in a black carapace, which looked indestructible. This was the only reaction Xie Jianqing could make in a hurry. It was the only method he could use to protect himself. If he were in his human form, he would probably be stabbed into a hornet's nest by the sword qi. The sudden appearance of the situation caused many people in the scorpion tribe to be alarmed. What was going on here? At the same time, countless people felt that a calamity had arrived. All the poisonous scorpions below the martial emperor realm could sense that they would not be able to survive this rain of swords. Even though their carapaces were extremely hard, it was still somewhat difficult for them to withstand such tyrannical sword intent. No matter how strong Xie Jianqing's shell was, it gradually began to crack in the face of such a powerful and domineering sword intent. Princess Mingzhu didn't even take a look, just casually unleashing her sword intent. This was a chance that Xiaoyang had fought for with great difficulty. How could he let it slip away from her hands? And the most important thing now was to kill the enemy. At this moment, Xie Jianqing suddenly woke up. He seemed to have understood something, so that brat already knew that he wasn't a match for him. That's why he had his strongest person hide in the dark and ambush him. As for him, he is just a bait. Xie Jianqing muttered in his heart with hatred. He said that he felt that something was wrong, but he didn't expect his opponent to be so ruthless, to be able to plot against him. Such a scheme could only be described as terrifying. It turned out that all of this was just a ploy to lure the enemy. Xie Jun felt very uncomfortable at this moment. Although he and Princess Mingzhu were in the same realm, there was still a gap between their abilities. As someone who was favored by the heavens, even though he wasn't in his own world, he could use the power of the heavens and the earth very smoothly without any hindrance. The power of the sword that had been accumulated for a long time was extraordinary, causing people to gasp in amazement. The huge golden sword qi fell directly. Although Xie Jianqing was prepared, the carapace on his back was still pierced through. Immediately, an intense pain spread through his spirit, and his body trembled nonstop. In fact, even the mountain range was trembling because of it. With this sword, Princess Mingzhu had almost exhausted all of her strength in order to completely annihilate the poisonous scorpion tribe. However, she had still underestimated Xie Jianqing's ability. Now he was indeed severely injured, but he was not dead yet. Xie Jianqing stood up with some difficulty, and the stinger was raised high to aim at Princess Mingzhu. "What a powerful little girl!" Xie Jianqing said angrily. At this moment, the poisonous scorpion tribe was already in a mess because of the azure sky sword rain. Nevertheless, Xie Jianqing was not in the mood to take a look because the lady standing in midair was the biggest threat. If she was still alive, then his life would definitely be in danger. Although Xie Jianqing was severely injured, he still had the power to fight. Even though it was very difficult, he could still attack. Especially under the stimulation of life and death, it became even more violent. Princess Mingzhu looked down at the huge poisonous scorpion below and gripped her sword tightly again. Nevertheless, due to the severe consumption of the sword earlier, it was almost impossible for her to attack again. Even if she slashed out a few sword qis, they would not be very powerful and would not be a threat to the scorpion at all. She did not expect that the ultimate kill that she had planned for a long time would not be achieved until now. Could it be that the two of them were really going to be defeated here? Princess Mingzhu was also unwilling to accept this. With a thought, the surrounding heaven and earth's power gathered toward her in a frenzy. She was a God-favored one. No matter where she was, she would have a great advantage and receive endless care. At that moment, Xie Jianqing's eyes were filled with shock. This was because he felt that it was too unbelievable. Where exactly did this little girl come from? Xie Jianqing was even more terrified. However, he also sensed that although the surrounding heaven and earth's power was being circulated, it was difficult for the other party to control it. Therefore, this was also Xie Jianqing's opportunity. If he could seize this opportunity and kill his opponent before she could catch her breath, he would still have a chance to live. As for his tribe, since it was already destroyed, it could not be salvaged. However, he had to live. As long as he was alive, there would be hope for everything. Otherwise, everything would become empty talk. A fifth-rank martial emperor powerhouse was enough to support a tribe alone. No matter how many other cultivators there were, it was meaningless. Thunder Prison, True Fire Kill. Chapter 2470. Xiao Yang, who was standing there numbly, suddenly jumped up and slashed with his sword. Earlier, under the attack of the black venom spike, he was indeed temporarily paralyzed. Fortunately, Xie Jianqing didn't make a move against him due to the cooperation of fate. Thus, he had some time to catch his breath before he was able to completely suppress and absorb the poison energy. When he came back to his senses, he realized that Xie Jianqing still had energy left. Therefore, he had to make a move. Beasts were beasts, after all. Compared to human cultivators, there were many different things about them. Even though they specialized in poison, their defense was still not to be underestimated. Under such circumstances, Xiaoyang had to make a move. After all, killing Xie Jianqing and devouring his soul in one go was the safest course of action. Moreover, this was also the best opportunity. If they missed it, there might be even more changes that would occur. In this battle, they had already caused quite a commotion. It was likely that some of the Almighties in the surrounding area had already discovered some clues. If they didn't make a decision early, it was inevitable that some accidents would happen. At once, the wind was blowing, the clouds were rumbling, and the flames were roaring. Xie Jianqing was even more shocked when he saw the young man suddenly take out his sword. In fact, he found it hard to understand what was going on. He was clearly hit by his black venom spike. How could he come back to his senses in such a short amount of time? Logically speaking, what he was facing now should be the poison acting up, and he would not be able to extricate himself. But now he looked completely unscathed. Furthermore, his decisive moves were filled with power. Could it be that he was completely immune to poison? and everything that he had shown before was just an act? At this moment, Xie Jianqing's heart was in agony. How could he have known that he had observed everything in detail, but still made a mistake? In other words, he had underestimated the young man's abilities. Princess Mingzhu, who was still forcefully gathering her power, secretly heaved a sigh of relief when she saw this. Luckily, everything was under control. In that case, she didn't have to worry anymore. She would leave the rest to Xiaoyang, and he would be able to wrap things up. Right now, Xie Jianqing was already heavily injured, and he could not even use a tenth of his strength. With Xiaoyang's strength, it was enough to kill him. Previously, Princess Mingzhu still had a lot of worries, but now, it seemed that she was just overthinking it. That person was still the same. No matter what he did, he could control it in his hands and make all accidents disappear. Even if it looked like he was at a disadvantage sometimes, it was probably just him deliberately showing it to make his opponent feel numb. Such a state of mind could only be described as terrifying. The poisoned scorpion tribesmen who had been lucky enough to escape this calamity fell into despair when they saw this scene. They were still in a daze, unable to understand what had happened. This was because what was happening now was beyond their common sense. That was why they found it hard to understand. They couldn't even accept the fact that their great ancestor, Xie Jianqing, was such a powerful existence. However, they had suffered losses again and again today. Even their tribe was about to face annihilation. Such a huge change happened in the blink of an eye. The Confusion Barrier tribe, which had been peaceful for a long time, seemed powerless under such a huge change. This was because they could not even explain it to themselves. How is this possible? Xie Jianqing kept roaring and questioning in his heart. He never thought that he would suffer such a huge loss because of a junior's scheme. In fact, it was very likely that he would lose his life later on. The surrounding thunder prison had closed in, and it kept compressing the space that he could move in. It was getting faster and faster. Xie Jianqing activated his power in a frenzy, wanting to resist the move head-on. He knew very well that if he could not block it, he would only end up dead in the end. However, the Thunder Prison's attack shattered the power that he had gathered with great difficulty in the blink of an eye, making it difficult for him to form it. That flaming sword edge had arrived. At this moment, Xie Jianqing was in even more despair because he could no longer avoid the sword. The sword pierced into his head, and countless flaming sword chis rained down. They rampaged through his body, trying to kill his life force. There was even a burnt smell coming out continuously. The people from the Scorpion tribe were in even more despair when they saw this scene. Their strongest expert had lost his life. At the same time, a ball of flame suddenly rose and engulfed all the people from the Scorpion tribe who were still alive, causing them to scream in agony. Xie Jianqing stared at Xiaoyang. He wanted to fight with his life on the line again, but he realized that he could not gather any power at all. He felt even more helpless when he felt that his vitality was constantly dissipating. His vitality was like a river flowing east, out of control. The strongest expert of the generation in the beast realm, who even had an extremely high authority, had died just like that. After Xiaoyang ended Xie Jianqing's life with a sword, he let out a long sigh of relief. Everything was finally over. However, at the next moment, Xiaoyang's expression changed again because he felt that the fate around him had suddenly changed. "Hurry up and pack up and leave this place," Xiaoyang said. Princess Mingzhu looked around when she heard that. After realizing that there were almost no survivors from the Scorpion tribe, she was secretly relieved. "Are you all right?" Princess Mingzhu asked worriedly. Although Xiaoyang's current performance could be said to be full of vigor, it was hard to tell what his current condition was like. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, "I'm fine. Help me collect these stingers. They might be useful in the future." Princess Mingzhu was startled at first, but she soon did as she was told. Since Xiaoyang said that they would be useful, then they would be useful. Therefore, she just had to do what he said. However, it would not be easy to take out the poisonous stingers. To the scorpion tribe, the poisonous stingers at their tails were their strongest life-saving means and attack. In fact, they would cultivate the poisonous stingers at their tails most of the time when they were cultivating. That was where the fatal blow was. However, in this battle, they could not perform their strongest move. In less than half a cup of tea's time, the two of them collected all the useful stingers and fled as fast as they could. Chapter 2471. The poisonous scorpion tribe was now in a state of devastation. Corpses of giant poisonous scorpions were everywhere, and it looked even more miserable. Broken limbs were scattered everywhere, and green blood dyed the place in a different color as if it was a purgatory in the human world. The stench was even worse. Anyone who got close to it would feel extremely disgusted and want to run away from it. The poisonous scorpion tribe, which was originally stronger in the biling tribe, had become dilapidated today. From time to time, some small insects would crawl by, which looked very strange. Not long after, two people arrived. When they saw the scene in front of them, they were so shocked that they were speechless, especially the young man standing at the back. His eyes were filled with shock. This was because he really could not see what was going on. What exactly happened to cause this place to become like this? The white-robed, middle-aged man's breathing became undulating, and his emotions became extremely unstable. Although he had sensed the change in this place and immediately came to investigate, he did not expect that he was still a step too late. When he looked up, it seemed that the poisonous scorpion tribe had been completely annihilated and no one was left alive. What exactly happened here? What kind of change was it? Or how powerful was it that was able to destroy this place? The more the middle-aged man thought, the stranger he felt. After all, the biling tribe's combat power could not be measured by ordinary realms. Due to their innate advantage, they were not invincible in the same realm, but they were also very difficult to deal with. However, the other party was able to end the battle quickly and retreat at an extremely fast speed. There were already many clues about this. There were too many questions that the middle-aged man could not figure out, let alone see through. What exactly happened here? The young man asked in fear. Even the poisonous scorpion tribe could be destroyed, which was enough to see how tyrannical the other party was. Moreover, it could be said that the tribe was exterminated. The middle-aged man shook his head. He was not sure at the moment, but his eyes kept wandering everywhere. Although there were no survivors at the scene, it was possible to determine what the situation was at that time from some traces left behind by the battle. From these clues, they could analyze more things and even find out who the enemy was. If he wanted to analyze it carefully, the biling tribe was a threat to too many people, so it was not strange that the other tribe attacked them. It was just that this matter came too suddenly and it caught him off guard. These traces seemed to be left by sword chi. The middle-aged man looked at the wounds and suddenly thought of something. The young man could not help but frown again. If that was the case, then this extermination was probably not because of the internal strife and conspiracy of the beast's realm. Could it be an outsider invasion? But even so, how could the other party do it without anyone noticing? Or is it to say that the strength of that senior is sufficient to crush the entire poisoned scorpion tribe? After the young man finished speaking, he felt that his words were full of loopholes. Since the other party really had such tyrannical strength, there was no need to be so careful. To be able to kill a fifth-order Martial King expert, his cultivation level must be higher than that. With such tyrannical cultivation and strength, there was naturally no need to be sneaky. Even if he came directly, it would be difficult to resist. The white-robed man was also thinking about this problem, because he also felt that there were all kinds of problems in this matter. If they could not deal with it clearly, they would be confused and would not know where to start. "Master, is this Martial Uncle Xie's original appearance?" The young man walked to the front of a giant scorpion that was about to collapse and asked. Hearing this, the middle-aged man immediately walked over. When he looked at the corpse that had become devastated, his emotions were stirred again. I didn't expect that you, old Xia, would be killed by others. The middle-aged man seemed to be joking, but there was a storm in his heart. Looking at the sword marks on his body, the middle-aged man was more and more certain that this was not an internal strife of the beast's realm. In this way, it was even more difficult to figure out who attacked them. The more thoughts there were, the harder it was to restrain them. How to gather these messy thoughts together was also a technical job. There was a lot of information scattered on the scene now, but it was not so easy to put them together. The middle-aged man looked up at the dim sky and couldn't help but feel a headache for a moment. Xie Jianqing's death was a heavy blow to their entire Biling tribe. It was not an exaggeration to say that half of their territory was gone. Their Biling tribe had 2 rank 5 powerhouses, which was also the reason why other tribes did not dare to covet them easily. In the future, he was afraid that he would be the only one. It was difficult to support a single tree. Although they still had many innate advantages, these seemed to be difficult to play a decisive role in the current situation. The young man's expression also became a little sad because they were very clear that since the other party could directly exterminate the Scorpion tribe, it could be seen how terrifying their strength was. Which tribe would the next target be? Under such a strange attack, would their Begi tribe collapse because of this? Pass down the order. Let all tribes be on guard. If there is any movement, immediately link up. The middle-aged man took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. The young man hurriedly nodded when he heard this because he also knew in his heart that the Biling tribe would probably encounter a big change next. Moreover, it was when the opportunity in the central region was about to appear. The world had become chaotic, and it was the first time their Biling tribe was like this because of an external invasion. In the rainforest, 1 black and 1 white person walked side by side. Their footsteps were not very fast, and every time they landed, they seemed to be extra careful. The reason why Xiaoyang was in a hurry to leave was that he had already felt that another rank 5 powerhouse was already on the way. If they were to fight in their current state, it would be very bad. Moreover, in an extremely short period of time, they would even be deeply encircled. At that time, the situation would probably become extremely bad. Therefore, it was best to slip away before they arrived. Moreover, since the goal had been achieved, there was no need to ask for so much.